An unknown voice in the dark night said that from today his new name is Zero, and the embryo organization is his new home and new homeland, and he must also forget about his past. The guy must become the most dedicated member of the organization, and to do everything in the interests of the organization. He has nothing to hide from them, and his only task is to carry out the orders of the organization. A guy chained to a chair must be ready to give his life in the name of the organization. The unknown doctor told the test subject that even if he becomes a scarecrow, he must carry out any assignment. A girl with red hair standing next to the doctor asked to answer her question. She asked to tell her name. The experimental guy opened his eyes and thought about who he was. His name used to be Stan. Before he was transferred here, he was a game booster. In a past life, Stan sat at the computer and told his boss on the phone that he would upgrade him to platinum without any problems. He was that godless booster, and, on the one hand, he did this to feed himself. On the other hand, Stan did it because he loved to play and win. A strange little elf suddenly approached his in-game character with a book and asked him to stay. The elf introduced himself as an electorate reporter named Henry, and he was eager to do a quick interview with the guy. Stan smiled sweetly and agreed to give a short interview. Henry was surprised that the guy agreed to this so easily. Never before had such a mysterious fighter agreed so easily. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by Stan waving in front of the elf's face and asking what he wanted from him. Henry opened his book and began his interrogation. He said that Stan took 47th place in the current tournament. And as you know, those who took the first 100 places are the strongest and most qualified participants. And he would like to know if he has any plans to join the military service. To the guy's surprise, Stan answered very briefly. He answered no. Henry was wondering what was the reason for the guy's refusal to join the military service. Stan replied that this was a secret, and now he needed to talk about a completely different thing, and only then talk about plans. The guy approached the cameraman so that his face could be better seen in the frame. Suddenly Stan greeted everyone and began to advertise his booster services, saying that he could easily earn them currency and boost them. Before he could finish speaking, Henry shouted that boosters were prohibited by the moderators, and they couldn't show it on air. Stan was disappointed that again he was unable to make free advertising, and Henry understood why there was no information about the player before. Stan from the real world took off his virtual reality glasses. He didn't understand what was wrong with boosting because he was better than any pro player. This year the guy boosted more than 10 accounts, and he even managed to get into the top players. The game in which he boosts is called Star Sea and more than 10 million people play it. You can get to space, Earth and other locations of the vast starry sea using virtual reality gaming devices with which you are completely immersed. Being one of the very first testers and later a fan of this game, Stan spent more than 10 years in it. Every task, every location, and even the location of the smallest crystals is more real for Stan than the dull world outside. The guy was distracted from his thoughts by the phone, in which the boss issued a new order. Stan saw that it was an order for a newbie and considered it easy. It's time to get to work and not complain about life. Then he thought that this new life would be simple and boring. Stan moved into the virtual world, where a voice was heard saying that this was the 24th test sample, and he was being injected with a serum called Valkyrie. Reaction: after 2 minutes 46 seconds, the sample came to life. Stan heard strange sounds of a siren, and for some reason the guy smelled something burning. His head was just pounding, and the guy didn't recognize the place he was in. It didn't look like the usual place of resurrection. Suddenly Stan saw a scientist who shouted that the sample had come to life, and that it was urgent to inform Mrs. Hell. The scientist took the radio and ordered the guards to come and immediately take control of the sample. Stan was surprised that the guards showed up. This was a slightly unusual start to the game. The guy didn't understand what was happening, but he knew for sure that it was better to run away from here as quickly as possible. However, the hero did not have time to escape because one of the guards hit him with his plastic sword. Stan blocked the blow, but there was something wrong here. For some reason, he felt 100% pain, when the limit is 40%. In such a situation it is worth disconnecting from the game as soon as possible. However, before he had time to pass out, they hit him again right there behind him, and this time the guy was taken under control. Stan woke up in a metal chamber, his hand still itching from the previous blow. Stan was angry because he paid the developers $300, but apparently the game broke again. But since it's a new account it's easier to start over. But when he called the system, the guy couldn't believe his eyes. There was no exit button, only information on the player's characteristics. Stan was a commoner with minor injuries who had the ability Focus, which allowed him to learn 10% faster and create items. It was also written there that Stan is an NPC model of the first version, and there are 358 days left before the opening of the game. The guy ended up 10 years ago. Behind the system, the guy saw a mirror in which his game character was, whose face was exactly like Stan's in the real world. And then he realized that he had moved. Stan had moved completely into the starry sea. At that same second, the door to his metal cell opened, and he saw the silhouettes of people. A red-haired girl stood in front of him and asked if the guy was the test sample. She introduced herself as Hell's leader and said that if he tried to escape again, he would die. Stan recognized her as the Scarlet Cobra Hell, the boss of the Rookie Killer version 1.0, nicknamed Sister Destroyer. Hell, meanwhile, ordered the soldier to send the hostage for a blood test. She wants to see the results right now. The hero was lifted from the floor and taken for tests, and he kept thinking about where he was. Hell was the lady of the aquamarine star, and judging by the costumes of the local guards, Stan realized that this was the embryo organization of the initial versions of the Star Sea. Now he understood where he was. This was Valkyrie's laboratory, where a plan for the development of super-strong warriors was created. An insane organization whose goal is to destroy the government. According to the script, he is supposed to be brainwashed and then sent to the battlefield like a mindless piece of trash. This is a really shitty start. After some time, the scientist looking at Stan said that the blood test did not reveal any features and it seemed that the period of his temper had already ended. The main effect of the essence is brain stimulation. The scientist wanted to open the guy's skull because he was sure that brain analysis would provide more information. But Hell forbade doing this because Stan was the first living specimen, and there was no point in destroying him yet. The scientist was disappointed, but agreed and said that in this case it would be worth observing the experimental subject. Hell bowed her head and told the doctor to send him for a brain cleaning first. Security grabbed Stan and took him to be cleaned. At that moment the guy realized that he had finished his game. After all, he is only the first level, a weakling. The guards around him are at least level 5, and some even level 8. The worst thing is that Boss Hell is here, and therefore the guy simply has no chance of escaping. But Stan was not going to give up. He had to somehow figure out how to avoid cleaning, and then he saw a bookshelf. On it was a list of literature for laboratory assistants, and then the hero came up with a plan. When the guards escorted him past the bookshelf, the guy immediately grabbed one of the books. At that very second they put machine guns to his head and ordered him to stop. But the doctor stopped the soldiers, saying that he wanted to see what the test subject would do. Stan realized that the plan had worked. Now the most important thing was not to appear dangerous to them. The guy opened the book he took and flipped through a few pages. These were the basics of mechanization, and the system window that appeared reported that the guy had begun to study the basic concepts of mechanization. Stan was surprised that the system worked, even though he is now an NPC. But he has a player system. This means that he can raise levels like a real player, no matter what he does. It will seem to scientists that these are the learning characteristics of the test sample. The head of the teachings was surprised that the guy was reading a book. Apparently the serum enhanced his learning abilities. Hell was delighted with the unexpected success. If he becomes a brilliant fighter, then their cannon fodder will increase in price. However, it was necessary to go for brain cleaning because the equipment was already ready, so one of the guards told Stan to stop. But the guy did not let go of the book. Then the guard tried to force it out of Stan's hands. The hero held on until the last, and because of such strength the book was torn. However, the guy managed to finish reading it and increase his level. The system reported that he had learned the skills of a mechanic. The knowledge tree of a mechanic was opened, and the guy received several stat points and received the profession of a novice mechanic. A few minutes later, our hero was brought into the office to clear his mind. The doctor informed Mrs. Hell that they could begin. They sat Stan on a chair and tied him tightly, connecting the equipment to his head. Smiling, the doctor said that he was very sorry because this sample was very unusual. What if they ruined it right now? After all, it would have been better to first carry out an autopsy before cleaning it. Listening to this, Stan thought that the scientist was just a pervert if he wanted to delve into his brain so much. Hell told the scientist that they did not have time and needed to start immediately. The doctor agreed, because sooner or later the sample would fall into his hands. Wishing the guy good luck, the doctor turned all the devices to maximum. At that same second, powerful discharges of current began to cause damage to Stan's brain. The pain was unbearable. The system reported about the danger. It said that Stan should make a decision. His willpower is equal to 8 units and his will is not enough to stop. In 15 seconds the guy's brain will be erased. Stan knew that in order to avoid the brain purge he needed 10 units of free determination. And then he remembered that he had previously raised the level. The hero ordered the system to add 2 free points to intelligence, and the system responded that it was restarting the solution, but Stan did not have time to wait. After a couple of seconds, the system counted the guy's points and reported that he had successfully avoided the brain cleansing. The equipment turned off. Stan was shaking, but was glad that he had time, then he would just have to play along with them. Hell and the doctor have already approached the guy. It's time to test Stan's acting skills. The gorgeous girl slowly leaned towards Stan's face. She began to whisper to him that from today on he will be called Zero. Organization: the embryo is his home and his homeland. He must forget about his past. Meanwhile, Stan was only thinking that the Red Viper Hell was too close to him. She was very beautiful next to him. The guy had missed her so many times before. But now there is no need to think about it, because the situation is too dangerous. Stan must not look or move, endure, but not reveal himself. Hell finished whispering in the guy's ear and asked him who he was. The guy was silent for a long time, and the doctor thought that the flushing had failed, although he had done everything according to the standard. Suddenly the guy began to speak, and the doctor and Hell drew his attention. Stan looked up and told them his name was Zero. The doctor explained that the essence of the Valkyrie enhanced Zero's ability to learn. The side effects of the essence may worsen his emotional relationship with others. The girl suggested that the experiment was a failure. However, the man replied that, on the contrary, it was a success. After all, cannon fodder doesn't need feelings. And Stan, meanwhile, smiled and thought that in no case would he become cannon fodder. Hell ordered the guards to take the guy to the recreation area. The guard apologized and said that the recreation room for experimental samples was not ready yet. Then the girl ordered the guy to be taken to her room because her management had handed him over to her care. Stan did not expect such a turn of events. He did not expect that he would go to the girl's room. He needed to discard all vulgar thoughts. A few minutes later the guy was in Hell's room, and the thought that he would live with such a girl in the same room made his pants feel tight. Meanwhile, Hell was communicating with someone on the phone. She reported that the brain cleansing was successful. The girl was personally present at it. The voice from the receiver said that now it was time to train him. Suddenly the girl told the boss that she would like to see her sister. Stan had been eavesdropping all this time and was surprised that the girl said about her sister. But a little later he remembered that Hell had a sister. The voice from the receiver said that their agreement was not like that. She was allowed to visit her sister once every 2 months. There was no need to cross the line. Then the boss hung up, and the girl was shaking with rage. Stan noticed this and sympathized. Suddenly Hell hit the wall, splashing out all the pain and rage on her. From such a blow, the wall immediately cracked. Stan had already forgotten that this beauty is very strong. Suddenly the guy saw that Hell began to unfasten her belt, on which the weapon hung. Stan fell into a stupor. Right now the beauty began to undress in front of the guy, completely exposing her body. The girl noticed that he was looking at her, and the guy guiltily looked away at that moment. Suddenly she approached Stan, but the guy guessed that most likely he was not allowed to do this. Hell tried to seduce the guy, but he had to hold on because if she realized that he was not brainwashed, then he would be finished. After a couple of seconds the girl turned around sharply, and Stan exhaled with relief. She went to her room, just a little more and the guy wouldn't have been able to resist. After some time, the girl fell asleep. Only now Stan realized that there was only one bed in this room. What kind of strange games this lady was up to. So, apparently the guy needs to sleep with her. He quietly lay down on the bed next to Hell. At that same second, the girl kicked him, causing Stan to fall off the bed. Naturally, the bed belongs only to her, and the guy must sleep on the floor. By morning, the guy was brought to the training pavilion, where Hell was already waiting for him. From today, his training in combat skills, hand-to-hand combat, and shooting begins. Hell threw some kind of device to the hero and told him to put it on. By pressing the button, Stan was enveloped in armor. But before he had time to react, he was immediately kicked in the chest. The girl did not stop and grabbed his hand. Pulling her hand, she immediately blocked it. In this position it is easy to break a limb. She then kicked him in the chest, causing the guy to start bleeding from his mouth. As a result, the great booster lost and lay exhausted on the ground. Hell ordered him to get up. The guy got up and the fight was repeated, exactly the same as the first. The hero simply received many blows to the face. The system that appeared reported that the hero had trained by 5%, and Stan was convinced that although he was an NPC, he was capable of raising the level and learning new skills as a player. Thanks to this, the guy will soon be able to become the strongest character in this world. Hell left, and in her place another figure appeared, who ordered the guy to get up. He was approached by a bearded man who said that he was his new shooting mentor and the deputy head of this base, Justin. After these words, the man immediately threw the gun to Stan. He said that there are 10 bullets inside the gun. You need to aim at the target's heads. Stan was surprised that from the very beginning he was given such a difficult task. Only Olympic champions could cope with this. The guy raised the pistol and tried to hit the targets, but all the bullets that flew out of the pistol flew past. Stan never hit, although there was nothing unusual because he was not yet strong enough and his characteristics were too low. Suddenly Justin plunged a dagger into the guy's hand. Stan immediately grabbed his hand, from which blood poured out. Why did this abnormal man do this? Justin licked the dagger with blood and said that they would repeat the shooting over and over again, and every time the guy did not complete the task, he would pierce him with the dagger. He was wondering how much blood the guy would lose today. Stan clenched his fists. This man was just crazy. But the hero did not want to give up. He wanted to defeat him now, but remembered that NPCs are not reborn, which means he only has one life. Therefore, Stan needs to be patient for the sake of his future. The hero raised the pistol and began to try to hit, and Justin only laughed when he missed because his blade was already ready. The bloody teacher continued to inflict injuries, while the two figures watched the training. The mad scientist said that Justin doesn't appreciate such a good specimen one bit. It would be better if they gave it to him for research. Hell said that the organization would not agree to his demands, to which the doctor replied that when the organization sucks all the value out of the guy, they themselves will bring him on a platter. The training ended and a wounded, tired Stan returned to the room. Hell was sitting in the room wearing only a towel. She said that the guy showed himself badly today. Stan felt this judgmental atmosphere. He hoped that the girl would not punish him with a knife. The girl got up from the chair and called the guy to her. He thought that now she would punish him too, but Hell pointed to the warm bath and ordered the guy to undress. The guy didn't understand her words. Would they really take a bath together? After all, his mistress was going too far. The lady didn't like to wait and asked why the guy couldn't follow such simple orders. Stan obeyed. After he undressed, the girl came up and began to examine his body. The guy could hardly hold on. This is already a violation, and no one can resist such touches on the body. Hell exhaled in disappointment, saying that Stan looked like a coward. The guy had no choice but to stand and be silent. She took him by the hand and said that if he wants to live, then he needs to try. Otherwise the organization will consider that they do not need him, and will give him to Professor Hendrik for analysis and a brain autopsy. Stan thought that there wouldn't be any showdowns because a little more and he would increase his levels, and in general he was an experienced player. Suddenly the girl pushed the hero in the chest. The guy couldn't keep his balance, and immediately fell into the bathtub. Hell explained that this is a regenerating liquid. Zero should lie here for an hour and all the wounds will heal by morning. Finally, she said that the hero should feel at home, and Stan, meanwhile, was disappointed, because he thought that they would take a bath together. Of course, he understood that a successful experiment does not mean that he will live his whole life. The embryo will continue to make new samples and conduct experiments. Stan understood that he had little time left. He needed to become stronger as quickly as possible. The next day, Professor Hendrik walked through the laboratory with Hell. He said that tomorrow he would go to management and ask for permission to dissect Zero. He did not think that he would be refused this time. Hell objected, saying that the organization had already rejected him last week. The professor should wait. The scientists did not understand why they needed this garbage. Or the girl had already become accustomed to the sample. Or maybe she even developed feelings for him. Hell cast a cold glance at the scientist, saying that this was impossible. Then Hendrik advised him not to mind his own business. He himself knows perfectly well what he should do. A little later, Hell was having dinner in her room. She told Stan to leave this gun alone. It was ruined and it was better to throw it away. The guy still pretended to be dumb and incomprehensible, looking at the lady. The girl continued to say that you shouldn't treat him like your child. Unusable things are trash, and it's better to throw away trash. And if Stan can't grow up, he, too, will be thrown out like unnecessary trash. Suddenly Zero began to speak his first words. He told the girl that he had fixed it. The guy realized that disassembling objects could bring him experience points. It's a pity there aren't so many of them. But if he gets even more mechanisms. Hell was surprised that the specimen was able to repair the gun. The next day they left the bunker on the street. Mrs. Hell was holding a pistol in her hands. She wanted to check the functionality of the device. The nearby bushes began to move and the first targets appeared from them, birds, which were immediately killed. Hell said that she informed the head about this. They gave permission to enter the armory. If the guy liked to delve into mechanisms and weapons, perhaps that's where he belongs. Stan thought that assembling and restoring mechanisms would allow him to earn experience. And this is what he was missing. He could only dream of the possibility of getting into the armory. Towards evening, the hero and his mistress arrived at the military weapons depot. The girl brought the guy and explained that this was the warehouse of the local base, and all their weapons were here. The guy was amazed by the embryo's combat training. There were a lot of weapons here. Stan was looking forward to gaining a huge amount of experience. The girl saw the guy's smile, and said that she remembered that book on mechanization that Zero liked. So she found him some more of these books. The hero can read whenever he wants. But now she needs to go. After some time, the girl returned to her room and began to undress. However, Stan was already sitting in the room, which angered Hell. She was annoyed that he had returned here. The guy pretended that he didn't understand why his mistress was angry. The girl said that they had prepared a rest room for him in the armory, and now he would live and sleep there. Besides, he was a man and it was inappropriate to live with her. She pointed to the door and ordered the guy to get lost. Stan was upset that his life together with the beauty ended so quickly. From this day on, he will study in the mornings in the training pavilion. Hell will be waiting for him there. Suddenly she stopped him and handed him a pistol. She told the guy to take it for himself because he fixed it, and now he is his. After that, the girl wished good luck to the sample, and he went to the warehouse. The girl also turned around and walked towards her room. At that moment the guy stopped. Hell turned around and asked the guy to survive. Our hero returned to the weapons ammunition depot and immediately began to study weapons. Every time he repaired or studied mechanisms, he gained experience points. Then the system offered to spend 200 experience points on the profession of a novice mechanic, and he agreed. Stan was happy that he was developing very quickly. In 2 days he received the 3rd level. In order to get out of here he would only need 6 months. By that time, no one will be able to stop the player here. So the weeks continued in the laboratory. Stan trained in the morning and studied mechanisms at night. Hell was disappointed that in 3 months this was all the guy achieved. However, he couldn't let them know what Stan had really achieved. The girl helped the hero get up and said that Professor Hendrik had contacted management again to investigate him. Although the organization is in no hurry to make a decision, the guy will not be allowed to waste the organization's finances with such a worthless fortune. The girl asked Stan how long he thought he would last here. The hero looked at her thoughtfully. In principle, he assumed everything to be so. That same night he also sat at his table with cutlery. The guy was constructing something using a soldering iron. He noticed that the organization had turned off the camera installed in that place, which meant that the embryo had decided that they no longer needed him, and they would not have to monitor him 24 hours a day. The guy bent down and pulled the heavy box closer to him. In the box was his pistol, which Hell gave him, only it had already been improved. Right now, dismantling mechanisms brings almost no experience. It's time to try strengthening objects. Now Stan has enough experience for such tricks. Although he improves items, they need to be returned to their previous form, and you cannot let them know about his skills. Suddenly someone knocked on the door, and Stan became alert. The guy immediately hid his pistol and spare parts for it. A red-haired guy entered the door along with his associates, and said that the organization was disappointed in him and starting today, funding had been reduced by 80%. The clothes said 001. Which means this was the second specimen to survive after 0. The first number said that he heard that this guy is the same exemplar created before him. The organization spent a lot of resources on him, but instead of developing, he rummages around in this garbage. Red grabbed Stan by the collar and said that the guy was just a failed experiment. Putting number 1 in Zero's place was the organization's best idea. Stan understood that this specimen had a completely cleared brain. The organization was his life. There was no point in interfering, otherwise the guy would give himself away. The first number ordered the other numbers and other workers to remove all of Zero's equipment. This is what Valkyrie expected when creating the samples: fighting talent, strong body and high learning speed, the best fighter. Meanwhile, 2 guards walked past the warehouse and looked inside. One of them told his friend to look at these useless insects. They experimented on these guys. Now they will be turned into cannon fodder. And they also erased their brains and completely turned them into obedient fighters. It's better to die than such a fate. The guard's partner advised him not to talk too much in front of them. But the other guard did not let up, because there was absolutely no difference. After all, these insects have had their brains erased anyway, and they won't understand anything. Stan looked at the watching guards. He understood these glances. Each of the guards looked at them as if they were cattle. At that moment, number 1 approached the guy, who said that they were finished and said goodbye to the unsuccessful experiment. Stan was left alone. By the way, about the embryo, the samples here are just cannon fodder, a weapon. And now Stan wondered, when their own specimen destroyed them all, what kind of grimace would be on their faces. Meanwhile, the 3 faces training Zero stood in front of the screen reporting the entire situation to the boss. Professor Hendrik asked again about the autopsy, and this time the voice of management said that they would do as he asked. They would allow Zero to be autopsied. Finally, the scientist received approval. He bowed his head and thanked the owner. Justin, who was standing and sharpening his knife, only exhaled in disappointment. He was very sorry, because this is such an interesting toy that he still hasn't played enough with. Hel, meanwhile, clenched her fist tightly. The moment had come that she didn't want, but there was nothing she could do. The next morning she was still training Stan. The guy standing in a fighting stance noticed that something was wrong today. Hel powerfully hit the body. The guy noticed that the girl was too aggressive today. The girl shouted at him to defend himself and counterattack, and not stand like a pillar. But the guy was still just as confused. The lady jumped into the air to deliver the next attack. With one powerful blow she knocked Stan over, and the guy didn't understand what he had done wrong that she was beating him so badly. Blood poured from his mouth and Hel continued to scream at him to attack her. Usually everything went much easier. The girl even allowed him to rest a little. But there was no way out. Stan's legs began to tremble, and he took a fighting stance. The guy accelerated and jumped on Hel to attack her, but the girl dodged it very easily, moving her head to the side. Then she abruptly took the guy's hand. Approaching him, she said that Zero's blows were too gentle. She threw the guy away, shouting that this did not look like awareness and the desire to survive. The force of the throw was powerful, causing the guy to roll a few more meters. But the girl did not calm down. She took him by the collar and prepared to strike. Stan opened his eyes. He understood that one more blow to him, and he would definitely die. However, Hel stopped abruptly, looking into his eyes. Then she just threw him to the ground, saying that it was funny, and she was sorry that she expected something from the guy. This is the end. Hel said that the guy should get a good sleep, and tomorrow he may not come here. The beaten Stan asked why he didn't have to come tomorrow. Hel turned around and began to leave. Leaving, he said that it was because the guy would be opened up tomorrow. Approaching the door, she quietly said that nothing could be changed. Nothing could be changed before the end. Now everything has become clear. This day has come. That's why Hel is so hot-tempered. She can't stand to see Hendrik picking the guy's head, so she beat him half to death. Women are so strange. Stan stood up with difficulty. During these 6 months, the only one who considered him a living being, a person, was Hel. Others saw him as a fool, cannon fodder, and a subject of experimentation. They mocked him, tormented him, because the prototype would not fight back. They believed that such behavior was in the order of things. But Stan remembered every drop of blood, and after all this he will not die just like that. He returned to the warehouse and sat down to work on the development. This is all that he collected in 6 months, which flew by for him like a month of ordinary life. Although he did not kill monsters or complete any tasks to raise the level. But he made up for raising the level in the limited realities of the mechanic class. Here he was able to gain a lot of experience while sitting in one room. Each character can master an unlimited number of professions, but every 20 levels a problematic task appears, In order to continue raising the level, you need to complete a special task. General level caps change with new updates, and in version 1.0 the max character level is 60, but Stan's screen says that his level is unlimited, meaning he has more power than any player. He is confident that the next stage is gambling blueprints. Blueprints are blue screens used in the mechanic class to create weapons and mechanisms. 60 types of knowledge can be used with each other to create a mechanism. Each combination contains many drawings, but after combining knowledge, only one direction of creation can be studied at a time. Some blueprints have prerequisites, so when merging knowledge, it is unknown how many blueprints you can get. But even when merging knowledge and experience, the player loses points in any case, because there is a possibility that another drawing will be created, which is why the stage is called Gambling Drawings. Stan performed his first merger and received a blueprint for a hang glider, which he threw in the trash. The next blueprint created was an artificial killer hand, but the guy considered this drawing useless. He needed something much more powerful. Stan was starting to get nervous because the experience points would soon run out, and he still hadn't received the required drawing. There was one more attempt left. The mechanic launched the system to create the last drawing. The system said that the merger was successful, and then Stan realized that this was what was needed. The guy created a lightweight exoskeleton that made him half robot. Now the leaders of the organization will learn what it means to cultivate their own enemy. A combat helicopter appeared above the laboratory and was already preparing to land. Hell, along with the first and other samples, were already waiting for the flying transport. The helicopter landed and a squad of fighters came out. The team captain introduced himself to the girl and said that his call sign was Silver Blade. The girl didn't bother for long and said that let them do what they were supposed to do. There was an SUV in the garage, and she would take the helicopter. There was no need to waste her time. Every 2 months Hell leaves the base. Today she left early in the morning. Now she is not at the base. If she were here, then Zero would have a hard time. But now the time has come. Stan prepared and endured all this time for this day. The day has come when the guy will get out of this prison. Professor Hendrik came for him. Today is the last and only chance. However, before going out into the corridor, the guy notices a strange piece of paper lying on the floor. He picked it up and saw a picture of 2 girls. This is Hell and her sister, Aurora. She also has superpowers, only she is the complete opposite of Hell. She has very strong regenerative and healing skills. She is able to prolong life and, moreover, resurrect the dead. At the end of the game version 1.0, the embryo created a huge amount of essence from Aurora's body. This angered Hell so much that she began to destroy everything. At that moment she was nicknamed the Goddess of Death. Suddenly, a system appeared in front of the hero, offering him a task, which stated that the embryo campaign is a bloody organization. No one knows where Hell came from, but whether she is loyal to the group is also not clear. The guy got a clue and he should continue the investigation. The hero bowed his head, since the girl was relying on him this time. He will do something for her, after which the guy took on a task related to Hell. Suddenly he heard Hendrik's voice from the loudspeaker, ordering him to immediately report to the central hall for further orders. Stan put the clue in his pocket, and decided that he would deal with Aurora when he got out of here. The guy looked around the corner, and noticed a camera that was watching the entire perimeter. The hero knew that the entire base was under surveillance, and it was very difficult to move here unnoticed. If so, then the first thing you need to do is visit the control room. This is goal number 1. A couple of minutes later, Stan got inside and killed all the guards. Now the all-seeing eye has been eliminated and Professor Hendrik is next in line. 20 minutes later, Zero was brought into the scientist's personal laboratory. The professor turned around and was delighted to see his precious specimen. By opening his body, he will be able to understand how the guy differs from other samples, and when he finds the reason, his corpse will become a stuffed animal in his laboratory. The professor began to prepare the instruments for the operation. The first sample brought back pleasant memories to him. However, Stan was already standing behind him and quickly dealt with the guard. Sensing something was wrong, Professor Hendrik turned around. He saw a dead guard. This was impossible. A specimen with cleared brains cannot kill their people. Stan, stained with the soldier's blood, put his hand to his head and smiled and saluted the doctor. Hendrik did not understand what had happened. There had been no problems for these 6 months. But the first significant problem suddenly appeared in Stan's hands, a knife that was intended for the scientist. Without any interference, the guy pierced the professor's chest. Hendrik was still stunned, blood poured out of his body. The wounded scientist looked at the camera in the corner that was watching all this, and told the guy that he would die. Stan told him that he had already killed everyone in the control room, so everything was fine. Professor Hendrik fell to his knees, choking on his own blood. In the last minutes of his life, he could not believe that the guy was just pretending all these 6 months. Stan confirmed his words by saying that reality is cruel, but Hendrik still insisted that this was impossible. The sample could not deceive everyone. Stan smiled, he raised his knife, and said that nothing is impossible in this world. He then delivered another finishing blow to the professor which cut his back. The mad scientist did not understand how this was possible. He was its creator. These were the last words of Professor Hendrik. The rebellious Stan stood and looked at the dying doctor, the first target eliminated. A couple of minutes later, the hero took off the clothes from the guard who brought him. He also took Hendrik's keycard. In the entire base, only 3 people have access to all the doors, and the professor was one of them. But the guy understood that if he went straight to the doors, he would definitely not be able to escape. The game would be over in 10 seconds. Stan couldn't screw this up. He put on his security guard's uniform and got ready to break in. His main plan is to break the connection. You need to achieve a couple of hours of freedom from communication. The communication equipment is located 3 floors below behind the wall. You will have to use mechanisms to break through the wall. Now you need to return to the 2nd floor for the mechanisms. There are several people at the base who may know him. Hell, number 1, Hendrik and Justin. The first 2 are not at the base, and the 3rd is dead. Others won't even notice him, but only if he meets Justin. Suddenly someone put their hand on his shoulder and asked what group the guy was from. For some reason he hadn't seen him before. It was Justin. Stan was unlucky to meet this freak so quickly. The hero lowered his cap and said that he was new from Group B. Justin didn't know that new people had been sent to them. It's strange why he didn't know, and the guy's voice was quite familiar. The deputy was not easy. He pulled out a gun and asked the guy to show his face. Stan squeezed his knife in his hand and asked him not to interfere because he didn't want to resort to Plan B. Justin didn't understand the guy's words and asked him what he meant. Stan turned around sharply and swung his knife, shouting that he had long wanted to tell Justin that it was time for him to check with a psychiatrist. The hero hit the deputy with a knife, but he managed to put his hand in front of him and protect his face. He was not so simple. Justin immediately realized that it was Zero. Other guards also did not stand aside. They opened fire on the enemy. Stan calculated the plan on the fly. In 2 seconds he could reach the machinery room. It will take Justin 3.7 seconds to recover from the blow. 3 guards won't be able to harm him in 4.2 seconds, and help will arrive in 25 or 35 seconds. Stan ran into his room with lightning speed, where the improved mechanisms were hidden. Justin was surprised that the guy decided to hide in his room because this is the worst option for him. He approached the guy's room along with the guards, saying that the guy was too gentle. However, suddenly they felt a strange trembling. The tiles from the ceiling began to crumble little by little. The door to Stan's room opened. Justin was ready for any challenge, but inside the open door, he saw a core emitting pure energy. Stan jumped out of the door, and everyone who was in his way scattered in different directions. The guy was wearing a combat exoskeleton that covered 50% of his body. Justin didn't understand what kind of device was currently on Zero, and Stan was already approaching his sworn enemy. He told Justin that it was time to die. A powerful mechanical fist struck the laboratory deputy in the chest. Justin immediately felt this pain running like goosebumps all over his body. A mechanical blow pierced his chest. Justin did not believe that this was really happening. With a merciless look, Stan took Justin's heart with his mechanical hand. Then he simply tore the heart out of the shooting teacher's body. Such wounds cannot be healed. Another villain lay dead on the floor. The second target was eliminated. Over the course of 6 months, Justin stabbed Zero 420 times. The guy would like to hear how he felt when the deputy suffered punishment for his atrocities. But it's a pity he won't be able to answer. The guy left and security arrived seconds later to find the deputy dead. One of the guards tried to contact the control room, but the attempts were unsuccessful. Then he ordered a report to Dr. Hendrik. But the voice on the other end of the radio said that another group had discovered the dead body of Professor Hendrik. The units were ordered to find the enemy. Lethal fire was allowed. All groups must disperse and look for the attacker. The group that heard the order tried to enter the armory, but an explosion occurred from there. The guy on the other end of the radio was trying to contact them to find out what happened there, and what that sound was. However, no one could answer him anymore. Suddenly someone came up and lifted the radio. Stan said that part of Group C died from severe wounds. They blocked the target in the laboratory. The guys managed to shoot him. They urgently need to send help here. The voice on the other end of the radio said that the group was on its way and would arrive soon. After 20 seconds, the group arrived at the scene and began running inside. However, no one noticed the small rope that was stretched near the door. The rope led to the planted explosives, and right now someone touched it. Stan ran forward and heard an explosion behind him. His trap was a success. The guards on the floor below heard a strange roar, and saw the walls shaking and stones falling. One of the guards asked on the radio what was happening upstairs, but there was no answer. He ordered his subordinates to stay here. The rest will go with him on reconnaissance. Suddenly they saw someone opening the gate, but the strangest thing was that he could open the gate. Stan raised his cap and ran out of the gate, and said goodbye to the guys who recognized him. Then the hero applied the key card to the lock and the doors closed again. The security tried to break through the gate, but everything was unsuccessful, because they could not open it in any way without a key card. Stan finally did it. He escaped from this gloomy laboratory in which he was abused. The guy rejoiced like a child and breathed in the clean air of freedom. Meanwhile, Hel was informed about what happened in the laboratory. She said that this was impossible, but the voice ordered her to return to the base. The girl asked about her sister, but the voice from the receiver told her that she had no right to bargain, and the call ended. At that moment, Hel realized that Zero had just been pretending all this time. Soon night fell, and our hero remained unnoticed. The squad pursuing Stan stopped because the car couldn't go any further. They decided to go on foot, knowing that the guy couldn't get far. One of the Falcon squad did not understand why they were sent for the sake of one sample. One got the feeling that they were not considered people. The commander answered him that the detachment had not had any assignments for a long time. This was an excellent reason to warm up. Then he gave the order to catch this dog, and the one who did it first would receive half a day of rest. The squad went in search, and Stan, meanwhile, was nearby. The guy was sitting behind a tree. He saw that 3 cars were following him. Under the cover of the night it would be difficult to detect him. But suddenly a large caliber bullet flew towards the guy with lightning speed. The bullet immediately pierced the tree behind which he was sitting, miraculously not hitting it. She slightly touched the exoskeleton. The guy realized that he had been discovered with the help of night vision devices. He needed to somehow reduce the distance to his pursuers. The guy ran and dodged bullets and thought about how he could get closer to the enemy, because the remaining experience points would need to be spent on close combat. Then he remembered one function of the exoskeleton. Stan pushed off and jumped towards the enemy. His speed was impressive, and he overtook the enemy in a split second. The sniper from the Falcon squad was surprised to see the guy in front of him. Realizing that the sniper rifle was useless in close combat, the soldier tried to pull out a pistol and shoot at the hero, but he was able to deftly dodge the bullet and hit him with his mechanical arm. The blow was so powerful that the soldier flew back and crashed into the wall. His ribs were broken and he died on the spot. The system reported that Stan earned 1,500 points for killing a soldier from the Falcon Special Squad, and he also received 3 hand grenades for this. A special squad that discovered the enemy opened fire to kill. Stan dodged and immediately decided to take advantage of his new acquisition by throwing a grenade at the enemy. An explosion occurred, and the fighters who attacked the guy were immediately defeated. The system reported that the guy destroyed 2 more fighters and received 3,000 points for this. Other members of the squad decided to throw a grenade at the hero to blow him up on the spot. Another explosion thundered, but this time from the direction of the forest where Stan was standing. When the smoke cleared, they came closer to see if the target was hit, and it seemed they succeeded. But that wasn't the end. Stan pulled his robotic arm out from behind the tree and fired it at his enemies. The commander shouted to the squad to go to cover, but they could no longer move from their wounds. Stan, sitting behind a tree, was happy that he had destroyed 3 more fighters. The commander could hardly contain his anger, because the guy was just an ordinary exemplar. But this ordinary sample, which was easily dealt with by the entire commander's detachment. The leader pulled out his knife and walked towards Stan. The guy killed the wrong people today. Stan, meanwhile, was checking the system. There was almost no armor, no ammunition either. His strength would soon run out. This battle needed to be ended as soon as possible. Suddenly he heard footsteps and saw the last surviving fighter approaching him. The commander waved his knife and jumped at the hero, but Stan dodged in time by crouching. Then he placed his robotic leg on the tree and pushed off. The guy easily managed to knock down a powerful opponent to the ground. Nobody wanted to retreat. The guys continued to fight lying on the ground. The commander then placed his foot on Stan's chest and pushed him away from him. The hero barely got to his feet, leaning against a tree. He realized that it was hard to fight with the commander. The commander said that because he underestimated Stan, his guys died, so he will not be able to live peacefully in this world. But before that, he must send this sample to hell with his own hands. The commander of the Falcon squad accelerated and again jumped at the exhausted Stan, waving his knife. The guy had no choice but to put a block with his robotic arm, into which the knife entered. The mechanism began to spark, and the knife stuck tightly in his hand. The commander pulled the knife and tried to pull it out of Stan's mechanism, but to no avail. Taking advantage of the pause, Stan punched the man in the face. The fighter fell to the ground along with the severed part of Stan's mechanical arm. Nevertheless, the mechanical arm beat very powerfully, and the resulting damage caused damage to the captain's brain, and he died. However, Stan's exoskeleton completely collapsed, but he still has a drawing, and when he has the material, he will be able to create a new one. Embryo's help will arrive soon. We need to leave. This forest looks vast and Stan didn't know where to go. First you need to find the place where people live, create a map and move on. A few days later, a meeting was held at the main embryo base, at which the head scolded people for the fact that just one sample was able to kill 30 armed guards, destroy the laboratory data, kill a special squad, and also take the life of Hendrik. In the end, he still managed to escape unharmed. The leader did not want to listen to all these fairy tales. The subordinates said that the Valkyrie serum introduced into the body of Sample Zero led to side effects that they could not predict. He received a talent for mechanization and an incredibly high level of intelligence. The leader guessed that the brain cleaning did not affect him, and the frightened subordinate confirmed his words. The Zero sample did not show any anomalies for the first 6 months. Perhaps he was pretending, but in fact he was developing an escape plan. Hell said that she knew Zero's fighting power. He could not have become strong so quickly. The girls suggested that the guy had awakened special abilities in himself. The leader ordered them to shut up. He does not want to listen to any excuses until they completely eradicate the abnormalities of the serum. No more samples are produced, and besides, the brains of all other samples need to be cleaned again. The first number who listened to all this became angry because the leader questioned his loyalty to the organization. He came forward and said that he was ready with his guys to lead a squad to destroy Zero. The leader slowly lit a cigarette and agreed to this proposal. He ordered that Zero be found and returned to the base, dead or alive. Meanwhile, morning came on the wasteland. In the distance one could see the fire from the fire on which Stan was roasting a fragrant chicken. He had already spent 7 days in this forest. Food and water were running out, but at least his wounds weren't inflamed. Apparently a lot of points in endurance were making themselves felt. The guy didn't know when he would get out of this thicket. He needed to quickly get to people and get himself in order. The hero had dinner, collected his things and moved on, but on the way he touched a strange rope. Stan immediately felt that he had stepped on something and braced himself. Instantly a net fell on the guy. It was a prepared trap. Stan got caught. The man put the gun barrel to the guy's face and ordered him not to move. The unknown hunter demanded that all valuables be taken out of their pockets and immediately given to him. Stan realized that this was a simple thief, and meanwhile the man began shouting for him to move. But our hero suddenly grabbed him by the throat and punched him in the stomach. The thief fell to his knees and began to beg the master, saying that he did not see a good fighter in him. Stan asked why he decided to confess only now. Its barrel was crooked. If you shoot from it, the thief will shoot himself in the face. The man raised his head and shouted that he was to blame. Stan looked at the guy and asked what was his fault. The man did not know what to answer. He said that he should have acted differently. It was necessary to take a second gun. Stan laughed at these words and put the weapon to the man's head. The thief turned around and said that if the gentleman is not angry, he will crawl further. This is what he does best. But Stan was not going to let the guy go just like that. He wanted to know where the nearest city was. In tears, the thief said that there was a town nearby, 1 kilometer to the east, where all sorts of vagabonds gathered. Then the thief begged to let him go, but Stan raised his fist, and the guy prepared to get hit in the head. But suddenly the hero took 2 fingers and lightly hit the blockhead on the head. A lump grew at the sight of the blow, and Stan said with a smile that he was not that strong, and now let him fail and not do such things again. A couple of hours later, Stan reached a small camp of tramps. He walked past a car in which a bald, bearded man was sitting. The man immediately jumped out of the car and asked to look at his product. Today there is a sale of high-quality products. You can also exchange barter without cheating. This proposal interested Stan because he did not have any money with him. But there was something to exchange for. He said that he needed a map, 3 buckets of water and 5 kilograms of food. Since there was no money, Stan handed over 7 cartridges, and said that he could pay with this. The seller saw the bullets, a very valuable thing in this day and age. He smiled and said that these bullets weren't enough for him to do everything. He wanted 150 rounds for all this. Stan said that the merchant was inflating the price, but he laughed because he could do this due to the fact that there is not a single camp within a radius of 50 kilometers. Suddenly, someone hit the insolent merchant on the head with a smoking pipe. A man named Carl appeared and told the bald man that one should not deceive the people. It was already difficult for people to live in the local forests. The merchant was angry that such a deal had been thwarted, but did not argue with the leader. Carl explained to Stan that this guy is a local speculator, and should not do business with him. He realized that the hero had been wandering in the forest for a long time, so he offered to stay in his tent today, where there was a warm bed and food. Stan accepted the offer. He thought that this guy doesn't look like a scoundrel, and even if he is, he's not afraid of him now. The hero and Carl turned around and went to his tent. In the small dwelling was the man's wife, whom he introduced him to. The girl greeted the guy by saying that she didn't know what to cook and made her own homemade food. The table was set in a festive way. There was baked duck, bread and various drinks. Stan began to drool at the sight of such dishes because he had not eaten for 3 days. He began to eat the food, and his health became better and better with each bite. A little later, Stan asked the man about the excellent gun that was hanging on the wall. Carl replied that he had served before and this gun protected him for many years and therefore he kept it in excellent condition. However, now he is too old and does not think that it will be useful anymore. His homeland was absorbed by a large country after the truce. The embryo collaborated with 6 states and supplied them with weapons, making the wars bloodier. But what Carl definitely doesn't want is to fight again. He likes the calm, measured life that he has now. After talking, the heroes went to bed, and early in the morning Stan got up to leave. Stan noticed the thief and asked Carl if it was his son. He replied that it was just his nephew, whose parents died in the war. The hero told Carl that yesterday this guy returned late, and that's why he sent him to sleep in the car. After saying goodbye again, Stan left the camp. He hoped to meet Carl again. Carl also hoped to drink a bottle next time, and the residents of the small town watched the hero go. A few hours later, combat vehicles appeared in the surrounding area. The subordinate reported that this was the only camp within a 50-kilometer radius. Apparently Zero was here. Carl and the merchant were carrying boxes of supplies when suddenly they were called out. The first number stood in front of them together with the embryo fighters. He asked if they had seen this guy and showed them a photo of Stan. Carl, who came to the defense of the town, replied that they had not seen him. The first number got angry when he realized that they had gone in the wrong direction and ordered his soldiers to get ready to leave. But then the first number noticed one very strange detail. One of the guys with purple hair stood and pounded as if he was afraid of something. The first number ordered his fighters to take this guy. He also added that they should search him as quickly as possible. The embryo fighters grabbed the guy and forced him to his knees, while number 1 examined him. Suddenly he finds a pistol in the guy's jacket. The first number knew him. This is the gun that Zero stole from the Night Falcons. If he didn't come here, then where did this guy get his weapon? He pointed the gun at the guy's head and asked where he got it from. There was no point in hiding it anymore. If the thief does not tell, then everyone standing here will die. The merchant panicked and told Carl that it was he who was hiding the guy in his tent. If you tell people about the guy, no one wants problems because of him. The first number pointed a gun at Carl and ordered him to tell everything he knows, and there is no need to deny that Zero was here. Carl had no choice but to point in the direction where Zero went. The first number smiled and said that they should have told everything right away, but he should pay for the fact that he almost fooled him around his finger, after which shots were fired. Meanwhile, Stan had already gone far and was sitting resting on a stone. The guy had a strange feeling. His eye twitched. It seemed to the guy that someone was touching his backpack. There was all the equipment from the embryo. If at least something was left in the camp, then people would be in trouble. 11 rifles were in place, 300 rounds of ammunition too, but 10 pistols were missing. One was missing. Now it's clear why Carl's nephew was so strange. He stole his pistol. An hour passed, and our hero arrived at the camp where he had been earlier. But it was already too late. The bloody bodies of all the inhabitants of the camp lay in front of him. Realizing that they were killed because of him, the guy was horrified. His fist clenched out of anger. He wanted to be on time, but he was late. Stan turned around and was about to leave when suddenly someone grabbed his leg. The surviving merchant, sobbing, said that it was Embryo's detachment. They did not surrender him, so they killed everyone. On behalf of Carl and his hospitality, the man asked to avenge them. Stan stood and was silent. He realized his guilt. Suddenly the guy heard another voice. It was Carl's nephew, who asked not to trust the merchant because it was he who betrayed his uncle. And his uncle, until his last breath, he didn't tell them where Stan was going. The guy stood next to the corpse of a once hospitable man, whom he wanted to see later, but not in such an environment. Stan fell to his knees. Carl, even dead, pointed in the opposite direction to where he was heading. The hero took off his jacket and covered the man's corpse with it. The nasty merchant realized the situation he found himself in and began to beg. He crawled away and asked to wait a little, and he would explain everything, but Stan was already reloading the pistol. The hero, overwhelmed with pain, said that until his death Carl did not betray him, whose boyfriend he had known for less than 2 days. A real man died because of such a pathetic worm as this vile merchant. Stan pointed his gun and said that he could apologize to Carl in the next world. A shot rang out, and one person responsible for the death of the camp died. Stan knew that the path that Carl pointed to led to nowhere, which meant that they would soon go in the opposite direction, so they should set up an ambush here. Entering Carl's former house, the guy noticed something interesting. The man's gun, and at that moment a system window appeared in front of him, which activated the revenge task. His task is to destroy the sample squad, and the reward is 15,000 experience points. The guy threw all the weapons he had onto the floor from his backpack. It was time for preparation. Stan used his mechanic skills and dismantled the old weapons to assemble one improved one from Carl's old weapon. He improved the man's hunting rifle and made it into a sniper rifle. Stan will make the offenders feel sorry for the attack. By evening, the combat vehicles had already begun to return. The guy was waiting in ambush. He noticed the approach of the enemy. The first number realized that the guy was not here, which means he was in the other direction. Stan shot at the tire of the combat vehicle, and it immediately burst due to damage. The first number asked the driver what happened. He replied that most likely the tire had exploded. But the first number was not stupid. He knew that a low-pressure tire could not explode. Most likely it was an attack. He ordered everyone to bend down and follow the armored vehicles. As soon as they approached the target, everyone needed to transfer to jeeps. Stan watched the cars drive away in the opposite direction and smiled because he knew that the first example would do this. At the same second, the mines went off and the asphalt under the armored vehicles exploded. The wounded soldiers climbed out of the overturned equipment, coughing from the smoke they had inhaled. But then bullets began to fly at them, killing the squad one by one. The first number managed to dodge in time, jumping over a nearby stone. He shouted at the attacker to show his face and not hide like a coward. But Stan didn't hide. He went out to the first number, and he immediately recognized Zero's face. The guy insisted that this was impossible, because he was a weakling and could not destroy an entire detachment of special soldiers. Stan smiled and replied that he had already heard this phrase somewhere. However, the one who said it last time is already lying 2 meters underground. Suddenly, a voice from number 1's radio asked Stan to stop. A hologram of a man appeared from the radio, who said that he was the head of the Embryon organization. He asked to return to the base, and then the leader would guarantee the guy that his memories would be preserved and he would receive a high rank and would not be a model. Stan asked why the head decided that he would work for them, and the leader replied that their organization is already all over the world. They are doing great things and working for them is natural. But if he refuses, then the world for Zero will no longer be so big and safe. The guy smiled and told the leader of the embryo organization that he would destroy them. Then he aimed his sniper rifle at the first number and pierced his chest with a powerful shot. all the people responsible for the death of the residents were killed. The system reported that the guy killed the first sample and received 900 points, and the task called Revenge was completed. Stan understood that his current strength was nothing compared to the strength of the organization. He would have to rely on his knowledge and unite with a force capable of resisting the entire organization. The guy left the rifle next to the tree under which he buried Carl and went to the Star Dragon Empire. A few days passed. Stan was heading straight to the Star Dragon Empire by train. He sat in the carriage with the chickens and thought about the fact that besides the embryo organization, only 6 nations possessed advanced knowledge, which meant that joining the 6 nations was mandatory to complete the task. The system that Stan was considering notified the guy that he had begun factional relations with the embryo organization. The goodwill of the organization decreased by 1,000, and besides, it considered the hero an apostate, and Stan also received a mission: the fall of the embryo. The mission surprised the guy, because the reward for it would depend on the progress of destroying the embryo organization, directly or indirectly. Stan concluded that due to the fact that the organization is expanding and developing, he only needs to destroy 20% to complete the task. Still, it was a difficult task and the hero decided that he himself could not cope with it. But there was no choice, so he accepted the task offered to him to destroy the embryo organization. The guy arrived in the western capital of the Star Dragon Empire. Looking at the cordon, Stan assumed that since he was wanted, the Empire should have already received information, so most likely he would not be able to pass through the checkpoint. The guy smiled because he knew that this wouldn't stop him anyway. Players from the red list who were wanted by their people in a past life could not pass control until they find the hidden NPC responsible for the smuggling and give him some money. Then he will smuggle it into the city. Stan approached the guy with a bag full of weapons and asked Buddy to take him to the city in exchange for this bag. A male smuggler with a scar on his face looked at the guy with an indifferent gaze. After appreciating the payment that Stan had brought him, he walked over to his truck and told the guy to climb into it. Star Dragon Empire is one of the 6 planets of the Aquamarine Nation. In the previous war, the embryo organization signed a secret treaty with the warring Star Dragon Nation and staged several major terrorist attacks in this territory. Thus, the Empire lost its position among the 6 nations and began hostility with the organization. Stan knew that if he walked a couple of meters to the east he would find an inconspicuous workshop at the end of the road. This was a hidden plot point, and he knew about it from the files of other people in his past life. Now he has no rivals, and he can get ahead of anyone. In his previous life he did not have such a chance, but this time the guy will take advantage of it. Approaching the workshop, he saw 2 men. One of them was just the one he needed. 2 men were playing checkers, and they were doing it with such enthusiasm as if they were playing for the whole city. Stan also noticed this tension, how fiercely the black checkers opposed the white ones. The man put his hand down on the table and Stan was disappointed to see that he had only collected 5 in a row. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by a sweet voice calling the guy. In front of him stood a beauty with short ash-colored hair and a refined figure. The girl asked if the guy needed to fix something. Stan was surprised that he saw a girl here, because he had never noticed her here before, and the hero also thought she was quite cute. The guy asked the girl if they accepted students. The nice mechanic smiled and said that of course they accept people who are ready to learn something new. She grabbed Stan's hand and told him to come in or he would freeze. This phrase surprised the guy. Does this mean sunstroke in their dialect? The hero had no choice but to go inside. The girl took out a mobile terminal and said that it had long been broken. This was a test. If Stan could handle the repairs, then he could stay with them and train. But suddenly the voice of an old man who was playing checkers asked the guy to stop. He asked the hero why he was applying as an apprentice. The old man's gaze was suspicious. Stan panicked, thinking that the old man found out who he was. But he needed to calm down and collect himself, so the hero told him that he was just looking for a job. The girl supported the guy by telling her grandfather not to pick on Stan, because finally they will have a student. There is no need to scare him, she already has a lot of work. Having interrupted his game of checkers, the grandfather slowly stood up from the table. The old man folded his hands and said that he was the owner of this workshop and if the guy wanted to work here, he first needed to pass his test. Stan became wary. He asked what test his grandfather had prepared for him. The grandfather barely smiled, saying that at least the guy is not a coward. Well then, listen carefully. In 3 hours you must make a mechanical prosthesis for this man. If he likes you, stay. The stranger was not happy that he was being dragged into this, and Stan, looking closely, recognized the man. Grandpa, just planning and drawing can take several hours. It's impossible, the sweet girl shouted. Alice, don't interfere. He must show something worthwhile if he wants to work here. If he's chickened out, get out before it's too late. Stan answered the old man that he was not afraid and accepted his challenge. The girl thought that the guy had gone crazy because it was impossible to make such a mechanism in 3 hours. The hero went to the workshop. On one of the shelves he looked for tools. Yes, it seemed impossible. But our hero had his own secrets. Inspired, Alice asked the guy to tell her about his plan and suggested that he make a drawing together to save time. Stan thanked the girl and replied that he didn't need a drawing because he had already thought everything through in his head. What, did you come up with such a complex drawing in your head in just 2 minutes? An old man approached the guy and told him not to boast in front of the girl. After all, it is unrealistic to think through a drawing completely in just 2 minutes, even for such a professional mechanic as him. The old man considered the guy's words nonsense, but Stan simply replied that he would see everything with his own eyes. The test began and the sounds of hammering and clanking metal were heard throughout the workshop. The old man thoughtfully watched the hero's work and tried to understand what he had come up with. The guy assembled his hand piece by piece and his prosthesis was already beginning to take shape. The owner looked at the components and was surprised that there was not a single superfluous element. Could he really think it all through in his head? The old man tried to talk to the guy, but Alice interrupted him, asking her grandfather not to disturb him. The hero assembled the hand piece by piece, screwed in the fingers and wires, and after a few hours the prosthesis was ready. Having picked up his creation, Stan turned to the owner and said that his mechanical prosthesis was ready. The old man couldn't believe his eyes. He really was able to do it. In just 2.5 hours he made such a complex mechanism. Stan brought the prosthetic to the man and helped him put it on his arm. Having secured the mechanical prosthesis, the man began to examine it and clench his hand into a fist. It's so flexible, just like a real hand, and very smooth. It doesn't rub the skin at all. I really like it. If you like it, take it, Stan said, and the man hurried to get dressed, saying that he would owe him. These are my materials, and you owe me, not him. And besides, the guy didn't ask his permission. The owner of the workshop was indignant. Then I'll ask now, am I skilled enough to stay here? Realizing that the battle was lost, the old man bowed his head and quietly said that the guy should stay. Let's see how long you can hold out. Stan was glad that now he had a place to live, and sooner or later he would definitely be able to get mechanical drawings. The unknown man waved to the old man and said that he was leaving. The owner told him to leave quickly and not come back. Stan closed his eyes. Here he could finally increase his level and relax. After some time, an unfamiliar man approached the car, where he was met by a servant, who was delighted to see his master return. He kindly handed the phone to the man and said that he was calling. A man with a mechanical prosthesis got into the car and said to inform intelligence that the wanted Zero had entered the western capital. On the other end of the line, in the 13th Division of the Star Dragon Territorial Strategic Defense Headquarters, a man was talking to a girl about the news he had learned. He is a deserter, wanted by the embryo, with a $150,000 price on his head, which means he is either a genius or extremely capable. The threat he poses cannot be assessed. It is necessary to provide protection to the informant and hide his presence in the western capital from the embryo's spies, network monitoring group, intercept all messages mentioning Zero's whereabouts. Do not let the information leak. The guy didn't waste any time and first of all he headed to the Clow landfill, hidden from prying eyes, near the 7th district. The head of the gray zone of the 7th district, Leopard, asked what was needed from him and why the guy was looking for him. Stan held a gun that he stole from one of the guards and said that it didn't matter who he was, because Leopard wouldn't mind working with him. After all, the arms trade is now profitable. After these words he quickly dismantled the pistol in front of the man. I can help reduce costs, and in return I will only ask for a small reward. The Leopard was surprised. Do you know how to make weapons? He lowered his cigar and asked what kind of cooperation the guy meant. I will provide a list later. You will be responsible for the materials and parts. I will be responsible for the production and assembly. I will work here 2 hours a day. I want $230 per gun, and I can take any mechanical junk I want. Leopard replied that since all the materials were his, he could only pay $150. Hearing these words, Stan simply turned around without saying a word and walked out. Wait, I agree to your price. Stan raised his hand as if he was waiting for this answer and told the man to prepare the equipment and materials because he will return tomorrow. The guy understood that the production of mechanisms costs money, and the salary from the workshop will not be enough, so he is forced to make this deal. He also understood that the 13th Division would easily guess that he was working for Leopard to earn extra money. Since they knew how skilled a mechanic he was, they would come for him sooner or later. Evening came, Stan rummaged through the junkyard in search of the spare parts he needed and returned to the workshop. Alice asked the guy where he had gone, and he replied that he was at the landfill. In a landfill, this place is quite dangerous. It's better not to go there too often, the girl worried. Stan heard Alice's words and said that he would be a little more careful. The guy went up to his room, threw off his bag and washed his hands to go down to eat. He was thinking that completing the task to increase level 20 requires mastery of 5 mechanical bases. But he still doesn't have a weapon base and a book of basic materials. Old Man Lou, that's the owner's name, must have the whole collection. He needs to ask him. Approaching the table where Alice was sitting with her grandfather, Stan immediately asked him if he could borrow books on mechanics. The old man grumbled, "Don't even think about it. I don't have any books for you. Don't be so stingy. Think of it as an investment in youth and training of a potential employee. You are even bolder than I thought. I will not give them to you in any case." Suddenly, sweet Alice intervened in their conversation, who said that Grandpa was just joking and handed the books to Stan. The guy thanked the girl, and the old man could not believe that his granddaughter was betraying him. A system appeared in front of Stan and asked if he wanted to invest potential points in training the weapons base. The guy confirmed the investment, and the system immediately reported that he had studied 5 mechanical bases of the weapons branch. He also received 2 new skills and a new drawing of a robot ranger. Stan understood that in a battle against the embryo, using others is a common thing. What really matters is his own abilities. Time waits for no one, and he needs to prepare. Night fell and an unknown cloaked figure approached the workshop and said that the target had been located. But he did not take any action. And in the morning Alice said that she had not slept at all and that things were not going well at all because of this. She looked at Stan and asked him what he was doing there. The guy replied that he was just working for fun. "Wow, you are such a hard worker. No wonder you are so good." Suddenly the voice of a man was heard from the street, asking if this was a workshop. Alice immediately jumped up and replied that this was a workshop and asked the man what he needed. He replied that his car had broken down at the intersection and needed to be repaired. The man then looked at Stan with a suspicious look. The guy noticed this, and the man told Alice that the engine was very dirty and it was better for the guy to do this, not for her. Stan, after analyzing the situation, realized that the man had strong and stable feet. He must be trained and most likely from the 13th Division. "Do I look like someone who is afraid to get her hands dirty? What kind of stereotype?" Alice grumbled, puffing out her cheeks. But Stan immediately tried to calm her down, telling her to take this as an opportunity to rest, and he would sort everything out himself. Leaving Alice in the workshop, the guy went out with the man to the car. The suspicious man made a friendly face and asked the guy if he was young and how old he was. "I'm 30, Stan answered firmly and opened the hood of the car. The man continued his questioning by asking what the guy's name was. The hero replied that a stranger should show his respect before asking someone's name. The man did not like the answers. He immediately realized that the guy did not want to make contact with him. Then he said that his name was Carl. Stan put on a straight face and said that it was a good name, but Carl misunderstood him because he was waiting for a cigarette. Stan's rudeness began to strain the man, but he held on with all his might. He handed the guy a cigarette, and then he replied that his name was Stan. Carl smiled when he recognized the guy's name, and assumed that he was not local. He asked where Stan had come from, but at that moment the guy suddenly slammed the hood and said that he had fixed everything. The hydraulic pipe in the car broke, but he got it done. It all cost $9. Okay, you're a pretty bright guy. Where did you study?" "I'm self-taught," Stan answered. There was tension in the air. Carl slowly took out his wallet. He tried to ask again where the guy came from. "I came from the village. Do you expect me to give you a discount if we are from the same place?" Carl took out the money and gave it to the guy. Never getting the answers he needed, Stan said that apparently his wallet was in the deepest pocket he had ever seen. It seemed like Carl was taking forever to get it out. The disappointed stranger silently got into his car and drove away. While he was driving, he dialed someone's number on the phone. Having reached him, he said that preliminary observation showed that the target is a mechanic, whose danger has not been established at the moment. It is only known that the target calls himself Stan. The voice asked what analysis of the target's personality. Carl replied that the guy was rude. All day long the work in the workshop went on as usual, and Alice sent out yet more satisfied clients. She excitedly told Stan that customers keep coming to their store. If this continues, they will soon be able to expand their business. She doesn't understand why. But several customers often ask her about the guy who works here. Stan replied that it was because he was doing a good job and wasn't trying to sell them a membership card. But they are all men, Alice said in surprise and looked at the guy with bewilderment. A little embarrassed, she told Stan not to worry. She would not treat him differently because of this. Upon hearing these words, the guy replied that this was not what she thought. Alice went to continue working and Stan got up from his chair and thought that the girls were completely crazy these days. Returning to his invention, the hero has completed the last element, and now all that remains is to assemble the robot. After a couple of hours, he completed the robot ranger. Its legs were like the tracks of a tank, its torso was made of strong metal, and it had machine guns instead of arms. Stan appreciated his creation and decided that he would call it Ranger 1.0. Suddenly a system appeared in front of him, which notified him of a new strange task. It said that some people were aiming to get a reward for the guy's head. Stan didn't see them, but they were hostile. The guy needed to escape from them. How can there be a pursuit of me if the Western capital is carefully guarded? Was this really something the 13th Division planned to see how strong I was? He accepted the task and began to prepare, by which time it was already getting dark outside. After getting dressed and hiding his invention, Stan told Alice that he needed to go away and wanted to take a day off. The cute girl looked at the guy, who had a cold look as if he was planning something. If you have problems, I can help you, Alice said. Stan reassured her, telling her that he was fine and not to worry about him. The hero left the workshop and headed to the landfill. He was watched by unknown guys who were surprised that this guy was worth $1 million, because he looks like an ordinary person. Then the guys got into the car and followed him, and the observers reported that the Stinging Bee squad was pursuing the target. Having reached the landfill, Stan thought that if they fought in the city, they could harm ordinary people, and this is the place for a fight. He went into Leopard's house and said that he had come for materials. The Mafia told him that it was already dinner time, and invited him to join. Stan realized that this was not a proposal, but an order and agreed. The head of the underworld smiled maliciously. A little later at the table, Leopard said that he had spent a huge amount of money to find out who this Stan was, but did not expect that he was an ordinary wanderer who had just arrived in the Western capital. Dinner Stan responded that sometimes sources can lie and the Mafia should think about it. The Leopard ordered the guy, for his own good, to tell him everything he knew about making weapons. He hoped to cooperate with the hero in an amicable way, otherwise he would have to force the information out. Suddenly Stan's face became terrifying and he asked Leopard if he was sure he could handle him. But the head of the bandits didn't even move his mustache, because the guy was just a wanderer and couldn't do anything to him. Stan said that apparently his source did not have all the information about him. He advised Leopard to open the dark side of the internet and see how much they were offering for this mechanic's head. The man grinned. Do you know how many idiots bluffed in front of me like that? The latter did not even receive a funeral. Reaching into his backpack, Stan asked if they were done talking. Suddenly they put a gun to his head, but this did not frighten the guy at all. He was waiting for it. At the same moment, his arm was covered with the mechanical prosthesis that he used when escaping from the laboratory, and he immediately jumped up from his seat. Pointing his hand at one of the bandits, he fired a beam of blue energy. Energy bullets immediately hit the guys with weapons who were guarding the entrance. The Leopard panicked when he saw the mechanism on the guy. What is it? He shouted. The head immediately ordered all the bandits outside to quickly run here and kill the guy. One of the guards didn't understand why they all had to run there. This was just one guy who had to be dealt with by the people inside. But suddenly these bandits were hit by powerful bullets from rifles. It was not Stan, but a civilian organization of mercenaries, a squad of stinging bees who ordered no one to move and then everything would end quickly. But the guy was not going to stop. turmoil began and he ran away from two warring factions. They also did not forget about him, trying to shoot him, but he moved too quickly and hid behind the containers. The commander of the special squad ordered Group A to open fire to hold the guy back and get closer. Meanwhile, Group B had to go around and press him from behind. Stan tried to hide behind one of the containers, but Team B quickly discovered him. They opened fire, and the guy leaned out from behind the container to shoot with his hand. The squad dodged and hid, and Stan, taking advantage of the hitch, began to run away to another place. The bandits didn't understand where these mercenaries came from, but Leopard guessed that they had come for this guy. Meanwhile, Stan successfully ran behind another container. He sat down on his knee and began to look for something in his pocket. He took out the game console, opened it, and connected to control the robot. Smiling, Stan said that, in principle, he was ready for such a scenario. His robot's eyes lit up. He is ready for the assault. Suddenly, a huge robot appeared in front of the mercenaries and began spraying them with machine gun fire. The commander was surprised to see the combat robot, and ordered to open fire to kill. Immediately the clang of bullets hitting the metal was heard. It seemed to the combat robot that the bullets of the mercenaries could not be bothered. The system informed Stan that he had 27% of ammunition left, and in addition, one sensor was not working. The robot was damaged and required repair. The guy realized that his mechanism would no longer last, but he must end his pursuers here and now. The commander, seeing that the robot had stopped, thought that their attacks had worked, so he ordered the squad to continue shooting. The Leopard noticed that this robot had turned the mercenaries' attention to itself, so now they have an excellent chance to catch the guy. But Stan had a plan for this case. The system window lit up red and reported that the guy had launched the self-destruct system. The hero hid behind the container and covered his head with his hands. The robot stopped functioning. The mercenaries ran closer, but suddenly they noticed that something was wrong with it. There was a loud explosion that shook the entire area and scattered the mercenaries in different directions. The Leopard fell to the ground. He was shocked that Stan blew up the robot right in the city. Meanwhile, the man in the black car who was watching the battle began to swear. After all, his superiors requested a secret operation. Now it will be on all the front pages of the news. He needs to quickly get out of here. A few minutes later, the 13th Division was already on the spot. Having heard the explosion, one of the commanders ordered everyone to lie down on the ground and surrender. The surviving bandits raised their hands. No one wanted to compete with the 13th Division. The Leopard was shocked that they came here. Stan couldn't tell the truth about his head then. He ordered the servants to give him a laptop, entered the guy's name on the internet, and saw that a reward of 1 million had been announced on his head and he was wanted by the Embryon organization for desertion. The laptop fell out of the bandit's hands. He couldn't believe his eyes. At that moment the Leopard decided that enough was enough. He went out with his bandits and voluntarily surrendered. The squad handcuffed them and led everyone into the car. One of the divisions saw the mercenary commander pick up his soldier and ordered him not to move. Stan thought that his entire operation would be pointless if the 13th Division stole his skills after learning about them from the remaining mercenary. Therefore, he fired beams of energy at the commander. This shot was his last. The squad soldier shouted for the guy to raise his hands up and surrender. Stan did just that because his mission was already completed. The system reported that the guy received 10,000 points, and he also fulfilled a secret condition: kill all 6 attackers. For this he receives a skill increase card. Stan was taken for interrogation to the headquarters of the 13th Division. Carl introduced himself. He said that he was an intelligence officer of the National Strategic Defense Star Dragon Division, and this was not the first time they had met the guy. Stan replied that he remembered him. This is the same guy with deep pockets. The second man with glasses ordered the guy to stop joking because they were under interrogation. The man with glasses wanted to know why Embryo announced a reward of $1 million on the hero's head. If he doesn't know, then let him tell all the information he has. Stan said that he is not afraid of the terrible uncle. If they want him to cooperate with them, then they should first show a little respect and let him talk to someone more competent. Stan looked at the 2 men and said that the 2 of them were incompetent. The man watching the interrogation took the microphone in his hand and said that he was the head of intelligence. Now he would talk to the guy. Stan agreed and the interrogation began. The boss asked whether the offender was a member of the Embryon organization. The hero replied that he was. Then he was asked what position he held. Stan replied that he was a logistician studying mechanical weapons. The embryo would never have appointed $1 million for a logistician. Don't lie to us. We have a lot of ways to make you talk, the intelligence chief shouted. Stan smiled and uttered an incomprehensible phrase. He said, Message log, June 4th, Galactic Calendar Year 687, Signal Location, Planet Aquaria, Destination, 8th Base of the Dark Star Planet, Message Contents, Top Secret. Hearing this message, the intelligence chief froze in place. The man with glasses and Carl looked at each other. They did not understand anything of what Stan said. After a silent pause, the boss took the microphone in his hands and asked the guy if he was sure of his words. Stan replied that if he had not seen the message with his own eyes, he would not have known about the Dark Star. But in fact, according to the game settings, the interstellar powers of the planet Aquaria are still a big secret. The interstellar forces that came into contact with the advanced civilization of Aquaria are called Kidolas. The Dark Star was originally part of Kidolas, but then fought off them and now they are at enmity. If the embryo makes contact with the Dark Star, things will be bad for the Six Nations, so Stan can quickly capture the Star Dragon's attention if he simply mentions this magazine. The guy asked the boss if they could now move on to discussing their cooperation, and the man answered him in the affirmative. After some time, Stan noted 3 secret embryo bases in the Star Dragon, calling this tip a sign of respect for their cooperation. Do you only know about 3? The boss asked, and the guy replied that this is of course not true. He will wait until they check this information and then discuss the rest. The boss then asked Stan what his terms were, and he replied that he just wanted to work with them on the embryo case. The man said that he had to report their conversation to his superiors, so the guy would have to stay here, to which Stan replied that they should not make him wait long because he only took 1 day off. After some time, the bosses gathered in the office to discuss the situation. The intelligence chief said that based on the data that they have, they can trust Stan and cooperate with him. Another advisor objected by saying that this information could be false. But another man in a suit said that this was unlikely because he was a fugitive from the embryo, and he could only rely on them to survive. There was no reason to doubt his sincerity. One of the advisors spoke loudest of all that he insisted that the guy be detained and extorted for all the information. The 13th Division did not need to negotiate with anyone. What nonsense! Stan showed us his honesty. We shouldn't push away someone who wants to help us. A quarrel ensued between the advisor and the intelligence chief. One called his opponent a coward, and the other a fool who thinks unreasonably. They were suddenly interrupted by the director, who said that they could both cooperate and control the guy. It would be useful to attach him to their division. The elderly advisor said that since the director insists, they should send the guy to the logistics department, so they can increase the benefit from him. And at the same time, it's better to keep an eye on him, since no one from this department can go outside. But the director replied that they would benefit from him anyway because the guy had experience in combat, so it would be better to send him to the covert operations department and let him fight against the embryo. This way his true intentions would be clear. After a while, in another wing of the base, someone shouted very loudly. A guy with glasses who looked like a scientist looked at Stan's prosthesis and said that this broken thing has 4 levels of encryption. Whoever did this is incredible. The same elderly advisor came to his workshop and asked if the guy could do this. Could he break the device? The scientist replied that there is nothing special in this device, only the encryption is well done. Most likely the creator is an ordinary guy from the village for whom any garbage is valuable. The advisor grinned, asking which of the things the scientist did was better, maybe a sticky bomb covered in clay or a mechanical gun that can't hit its target, or fake breasts with nipples that shoot poisonous needles. Those 2 agents who were hit by their own needles because they put on their breasts incorrectly are still in the hospital. Meanwhile, the intelligence chief was talking to someone on the phone and said that he would make sure that Stan entered the covert operations department. Could this guy really be valuable? On the other end of the line was the same man to whom Stan made a prosthesis. He said that the hero could offer them not only valuable information, but he had a premonition that he would play an important role in their battle against the embryo. Stan was locked in the base, and the next day at night there was a noise in one of the abandoned cities. Tanks attacked the base. The authorities could not believe that the Embryon organization dared to establish a base in their country. Right now they were attacking one of them. The embryo soldiers could not understand where the Star Dragon came from here, because their location was classified. Meanwhile, at the second base of the Embryon organization, Noise also arose due to the roar of the engines of tanks and armored vehicles. The girl with blue hair from the Star Dragon Special Agents Squad was outraged that they had to rest while their leader recovered from his injuries. Apparently their superiors did not consider them to be people. Meanwhile, the guy tried to break into a closed door, who realized that it was being broken into and reported that an intruder had been found. Sirens immediately sounded, signaling that the main security system had been hacked. All squads should immediately go to the main room. Hearing the sound of approaching soldiers, the girl asked the hacker to hurry up. The guy replied that he had logged in, but he needed 3 minutes, and a squad of fighters would be here in less than 1. The third member of the squad took the bag and said that their commander gave them a new device before the mission. The hacker doubted the new mechanism because only fools worked in their development department. The girl took out a mechanical arm and said that they had no choice. If the data was damaged, then all their efforts were in vain. She decided to believe in the new device. Putting on a mechanical prosthesis, the girl ran and hit the locked door. The door immediately broke through, and the girl was surprised that the new device was so powerful. The hacker said that he would hack the database, and the other 2 members of the squad needed to cover him. The squad understood the order, and they immediately began to deal with the approaching soldiers. A few minutes later the system reported that formatting was complete and the self-destruction system was starting. It was time to run. The girl asked whether he had managed to do everything, and the hacker confirmed that he had downloaded everything. A couple of minutes later there was an explosion, which signaled the destruction of the next embryo base. Meanwhile, at one of the embryo bases, everything was quiet and calm. A man in a suit reported to the boss that the 45th base was destroyed by a star dragon. The head of the embryo couldn't believe his words. He asked how they knew about her. It is not yet known, perhaps it was Zero, but the leader disagreed with this statement. An ordinary test subject could not find out about something as secret as the location of the base. After dispatching the servant, the man placed his finger on a button that said it recognized the identity and would connect him to a personal line. A hologram of an unknown guy appeared in front of the leader, and he ordered him to secretly check everyone who had access to information about the location of the base, and immediately inform him if he found anything. It was time to cleanse the organization of rats. Meanwhile, the Special Star Dragon Squad reported on the completion of the task. The boss praised them because this time they received a lot of valuable information. He also said that they should return the hand to headquarters and asked if they liked the device. The girl with shining eyes answered with enthusiasm that thanks to her they were able to evacuate easily. She wanted to know what kind of genius made her. But unfortunately, the man could not tell this. Then the girl asked if they would get it again, and he replied that it all depended on his superiors. Meanwhile, in the workshop where Stan once studied, one girl could not find a place for herself. Alice was worried that Stan had disappeared 3 days ago. Her grandfather advised her to be optimistic, maybe he had died. Tears appeared in her eyes, and she asked her grandfather to do a favor for her granddaughter, and ask someone to help find him. Lou replied that when she stole his books, she didn't even think about the fact that he was her grandfather. If so, then I think I should sell all your wine that you hide under the floor in your bedroom. What are you talking about? Do you think your grandfather is so petty? If you just want to find him, then rely on me. After some time, the phone rang in the office of a man with a prosthetic arm. Old man asked what the guy is doing now. The man replied that everything was fine, he just wanted to work with them, that's all. Okay, send him back or my granddaughter will destroy my wine collection. The man replied that he couldn't because the rules don't allow it. But Lou reminded him that he makes the rules himself and let him send Stan back because he owes him for the last time. Closer to night, a tinted black car drove up to the workshop. The door opened and Stan calmly came out and headed into the workshop. At that same second, the formidable Alice pounced on him and asked where he was. They were actually very worried about him. You're not from this country. Something could have happened to you. We were about to call the police. Where the hell did you go? Stan got a little nervous and said he was just out for a walk. Alice grabbed him by the ear and asked if he could come up with a better excuse. The guy replied that he thought this excuse was not bad. Suddenly Alice calmed down and said that she saw the news on TV yesterday about the shootout at the landfill. She was worried that something had happened to Stan. Stan was surprised that the girl was worried about him. He still needed to call her. Suddenly their conversation was interrupted by the grandfather, who said that he thought that the guy would not return alive. It was a pity that he returned. Alice turned to Stan and said that she would buy him a phone so that they could always be in touch. But Stan suddenly took the phone out of his pocket and said that he already had it. Grandfather, looking at the device, said that it was a phone with a code from the 13th Division and asked if the guy had joined them. Stan replied that he was a very important suspect. The 13th Division gave it to him to track and contact him, so he must carry this phone around the clock. The old man grabbed the guy and said that he was a fool. The 13th Division would not have told him if they wanted to follow. There was no escape from joining the 13th Division, and he needed to leave urgently. But maybe Stan will still consider staying here because he's interested in his granddaughter. Alice immediately became embarrassed and shouted that they had understood everything wrong. Old Man Lou told Stan that he doesn't understand much about the feelings of young people. Not that Alice is a little girl, but the guy needs to try because Grandpa still wants to hold his great-grandchildren in his arms. Listening to these words, the sweet beauty burned with shame. He walked away, leaving them alone, a silent pause and awkwardness reigning in the air. Stan decided to break the silence first, and said that her girlfriend was just joking. He just misunderstood everything. Alice raised her eyes and looked embarrassed at Stan, who looked away. Then she turned around and said that if the guy says so, then so it is. After these words she left. A few minutes later in his room, Stan was thinking about the fact that most likely he said the wrong thing, and in general, these old people who want grandchildren are so scary. Suddenly he received a message from the system which he decided to check immediately. The system reported that the destruction of the embryo was completed at 2%. It seems that it was not in vain that he provided the report to the 13th Division. Also, apparently the connection to intelligence was recognized by the system as indirect penetration. It was better for Stan to fight the organization himself. He knew that the embryo was definitely strengthening his powers, so he needed to take risks to get new drawings and improve his equipment. The next day, after conducting several experiments, he successfully fused and invented huge exploding bullets. The guy decided that this would be enough, but this is an entry-level weapon, so you shouldn't rely heavily on it. At that moment, the same black division car drove up to the workshop and honked its horn. Stan turned around when he heard the sound of the car and immediately recognized it as the 13th Division. Going out into the street, he asked a man he already knew why they were here. He said that the report he provided had been verified. Now the division believed the guy's sincerity and was ready to cooperate. The authorities decided to accept Stan into the 13th Division. The organization also decided to send him to the Covert Operations Department. He will be assigned to the squad later. They shook hands and Stan decided that this way he could attack the embryo directly. Meanwhile, Alice sat on the sofa hugging a pillow and thinking about her feelings. She thought that she felt a little respect for the guy, not admiration. But what if Stan really felt something for her? Suddenly a guy appeared in front of her and said that he wanted to talk to her. Alice was frightened by such a sudden appearance and began to apologize because Stan is a good person. But Stan smiled when he saw her reaction and said that their country wanted him to become a civil servant, and he couldn't refuse them. But he will help with the workshop whenever he can, because the guy doesn't want the business to disappear. Alice leaned towards the hero and asked him to be careful, and Stan himself promised to help, so if he didn't keep his word, Alice threatened to cut his salary. The guy smiled and agreed with her words. Apparently there was no more misunderstanding between them. Meanwhile, the logistics department in the 13th Division was in full swing. A girl with blue pigtails from a special squad came to the department and asked which of these guys was called Michael. The excellent students raised their eyes and began to look at each other with enthusiasm when they saw such a beauty in their workshop. Michael, who was the lead developer, hesitantly said that it was him and asked what the girl's name was. The girl said that her name is Lilith. She also said that she heard that Michael is one of the best in the logistics department. Coming closer to the guy, the girl asked, "Were you the one who created that mechanical arm? Is there something wrong with her?" "It's not surprising that something is wrong with her. A simpleton like him." "Not at all," Lilith answered. "The fact is that it was very useful to me and I would like to make a personal order." Michael realized that he was in an awkward position and did not know what to answer. Then he was still able to say that it was not he who created it. Lilith immediately became indignant that the guy didn't tell her earlier, and she just wasted her time. The girl angrily left the office, and Michael's comrades began to quietly laugh at him. "Why are you laughing? The new guy will most likely be sent to us, and then I will take good care of him and teach him a couple of lessons." After some time, the The same hero appeared in the 13th Star Dragon District in the Secret Operations Department. Lilith was sitting with a special squad. When she saw the guy, she assumed that he was the one whom the director had personally assigned to their squad. The guy introduced himself as Stan and told the guys that he was their new mechanic. The guy in safety glasses with green hair introduces himself as Harry, and he is the hacker of this squad. A taciturn and gloomy guy with a scar on his cheek briefly introduced himself as John. He was a sniper. Lilith asked why the guy needs a mask on his face. Is he really hiding his face because he doesn't trust them? To which Stan replied that his identity is confidential. The girl became thoughtful. A mechanic, a confidential person. It turns out that Stan created that hand. The guy confirmed the girl's guess and asked how she knew. But she quickly approached the guy, put her hand on his shoulder, and immediately asked if he could create another such hand for her. Stan said that he could only if it was at her expense. The girl immediately called him a redneck, and the guy replied that he didn't even know her name. The beauty with blue pigtails introduced herself as Lilith, and she is the close combat of their squad. Stan asked how many of them were in the squad. Lilith said that there were only 4 people. Their captain was now in the hospital and he was a master of fist fighting. Hearing that the captain was in the hospital, the hero assumed that their squad was assigned the most difficult and dangerous missions. But this was not so. Lilith said that he was in the hospital because he was poisoned. Suddenly, their acquaintance was interrupted by the sound of a notification. Hacker Harry immediately sat down at the computer and saw that despite the addition of a newcomer, management gave them a new task. They needed to catch a black spider hiding in the western capital. Lilith recognized this name. It was a bounty hunter who left their agents for the last time by blowing up 2 streets. At that moment a system window appeared in front of Stan with the task of destroying the black spider. John asked when they were leaving. The girl said that there was no need to rush. The intelligence department had already discovered his location. They would leave at night. The detachment went to rest and closer to night, they arrived at the place indicated by reconnaissance. Harry told Stan that since this was his first task, he would monitor the area. The guy would be the eyes and ears of the squad. His task was to report all the information he received. The hero understood his task. It should be easy, but he wanted to kill monsters. The operation began. The squad went to take their positions and Stan watched the situation. Sniper John pointed his rifle at the building. Lilith, ready for battle, said that the building ahead was the hideout of a black spider. He is on the 3rd floor and is most likely very careful, not making a sound. But suddenly Stan said that there was no need for caution because the black spider had already discovered them. Lilith was surprised and asked the guy how he knew this. Meanwhile, a dark figure of a man appeared above the special squad, standing on the roof of the house and watching them. At this moment, fire was immediately opened on the squad, but they were successfully able to evade. Lilith confirmed Stan's words. Now she sees that they really found them. A squad of men in masks and bulletproof vests ran towards them. All of them were armed with machine guns. Harry panicked. For some reason the information from intelligence turned out to be false. The black spider was not alone here. A battle ensued. John and Harry tried to shoot back from the enemies, and Lilith immediately knocked out those who came closer. All this was observed by a spider, who laughed at the fact that the dogs of the 13th Division dared to come here. An impressive big guy with a spider tattoo on his face said that since these kids decided to raise their paws on him, he would tear them off. The criminal ordered his subordinates to kill them, but Lilith called them simply a disgrace. The girl reached for her sword and told the guys that she was leaving these pawns on them, and in the meantime, she will take care of their goal personally. Like a cat, Lilith quickly jumped and covered a huge distance in a couple of seconds. At great speed, she flew towards the criminal, waving her sword, but the spider easily dodged it by simply jumping away. The man told the girl that he respected her courage, but would finish her off quickly. Such impudent confidence angered Lilith. The black spider said goodbye to the beauty and fired a burst at her from a machine gun, but Lilith was still as fast and graceful, as if she were a cat, bending and dodging bullets. The girl quickly landed near the enemy, and the black spider ran out of ammunition. The man had long ago realized that the girl was good in close combat and fist fighting, and the fight would not be easy. Lilith tried to attack him with a sword, but the man defended himself with his machine gun, blocking the attack. The girl immediately realized that her opponent was bad in close combat. This was her chance to win. She jumped and brought the sword to the head of the black spider. bidding farewell to this old man. Then the girl suddenly pressed the lever on the hilt of the sword. The blade immediately lengthened and cut straight into the man's neck. He fell to his knees holding his neck. The criminal could not believe that this knife had become longer. But he suddenly laughed, and said that this was not enough to kill him. Saying that she could not kill him, the black spider began to choke on its own blood, which was gushing from its neck. Ultimately, he fell dead, and Lilith told Stan that he had made an excellent blade for her. However, Stan advised the girl not to let her guard down because the black spider was still alive. "It can't be, he's definitely dead. Look at his face, there's not a drop of life in his eyes. He is a Superman and his strength is not so simple. Take off the mask from defeated enemies and you will see everything for yourself." Lilith returned to the squad, which was looking at the cut and killed black spider fighters. The girl began to mock, "Newbie, I understand you want to prove yourself, but I know everything better than you." However, John was cautious and therefore decided to follow Stan's advice and check everything himself. Taking off his mask, he saw the mark of a black spider on a man. But was it really a man? John immediately fired a sniper rifle at the corpse. Stan told the guys to rip their heads off as quickly as possible. They began to take off their masks and realized in horror that all these people who were attacking them were without faces. Stan continued to monitor the situation with the help of drones. He directed the squad, protecting them from danger. The guy gave out instructions: one dead man clockwise, tear off his head, the second at 4 o'clock. The squad continued to destroy the monsters by shooting them in the heads or tearing them off. This is the only way to defeat unknown creatures. In the end, they killed all but one. John asked what to do with him and Stan sharply shouted that they should not kill him. A zombie-like monster ran towards them, and the hero told the fighters to break his arms and legs. The creature with the spider tattoo said that they couldn't kill him. It wasn't worth wasting their time and energy. But suddenly John grabbed him and began to twist him. The black spider did not understand how they guessed about his strength. It was parasitic copying. Once in a certain period of time the spider can create copies without faces. Clones follow it within a fixed radius, and it can endlessly reincarnate into nearby clones. There are only 10 here, and he hid the rest all over the world. The black spider couldn't believe it. He asked who this guy was and what he knew about his ability. But Stan didn't listen to him. He looked at the system that gave him 4,000 points just for catching a spider. The guy was disappointed with such a small number of points. The heroes successfully completed the mission and returned home. Stan was released to the workshop to his girlfriend. Alice thanked the guy for expanding her workshop. Very soon she would be able to use the new premises. Stan was happy that he received many orders from agents for a retractable knife after advertising Lilith. At this rate he would soon be rich. Meanwhile, in the Star Dragon, one of the bosses was very dissatisfied. The man was furious that Stan wouldn't give them his blueprints. The advisor suggested a solution to this problem. You just need to find someone who will sell this retractable knife, and they themselves can copy its drawing. The authorities decided to do so, and the next day sent a messenger to the Secret Service Department. A friendly guy asked the guys to sell him one of the knives that Stan made. The formidable Lilith said that the guy might not even dream about it. Everyone knows that even if they just copy the drawing, they can't do that to people. After these words, the people from the secret department turned around and began to leave. The messenger begged them to stop. They can't do it themselves, they want to steal it. They'd be ashamed. We won't sell it at any price. However, there was a man for whom money was more important than principles. He took out a knife and asked the messenger if this was the thing he needed. The guy asked to name the price and the seller asked for $30,000. All the other employees looked at the scoundrel disapprovingly. The price was too high. But the messenger was ready to buy a knife for any money, so they shook hands and the deal was a success. After some time, the advisor brought a knife to Michael and asked if he could make exactly the same one. He replied that the work was done roughly and there was no code. He could easily recreate the drawing. The advisor promised that if the guy succeeded, he would no longer have to serve in this department. He would be promoted to the Research and Development Department. This offer suited Michael. Meanwhile, Stan was relaxing in the workshop when suddenly he received a phone call. In what sense have all the agents cancelled their orders? How did this happen? Just recently everyone needed the guy's knife. Lilith, on the other end of the line, said with dissatisfaction that the development department had copied his drawing and was going to do mass production. Stan looked at the knives that he had already made. He was angry at the bosses for treating him like this. If so, let them not blame him for his rudeness now. The next day the guy came to the clandestine weapons company. They assessed his product and asked if he could supply it on an ongoing basis. But Stan had another offer. He brought 1,000 knives and offered to sell each for 5,000, and he also wants to sell his drawing. Its price will be $1 million. The aristocrat in the chair was very interested. He asked the guy if he could give up the price and Stan refused. Then the aristocrat agreed. Towards evening, one of the bosses reported that the development department had confirmed its report, and now the drawing of the retractable knife belonged to the director. The director bowed down and told the guy not to rejoice too early. The man thought that these words were said because the director was worried about Stan's reaction. But the guy does not intend to join the 13th Division. He will not do anything to them. Do you really think so? The director said and began to take out an envelope from under the folders. Well, of course, I think so, the head of research answered and began to gradually doubt his answers. Is that why you took advantage of your opportunities and resold weapons to the division? I'm extremely disappointed with you, the director said and handed him the envelope with the report. After this moment, checks began at the research headquarters. The entire department was buzzing. Everyone was alarmed. The workers discussed the recent inspections of the research director. They said that he was illegally resell weapons. The second worker did not believe this, and said that most likely it was Stan who framed the director. Apparently the guy gained the support of the top. After these words the guys fell silent because Stan himself was coming here. He walked with the director, who was very friendly with him. The employees did not understand why even the executive director was so polite to him. Meanwhile, the director took the guy into the office to introduce him to someone. When the guy saw who called him, he was slightly surprised. This was the same man for whom he made a prosthesis in the workshop. The old man asked if the guy was surprised by such a meeting, but Stan initially knew who this old man was. So it was time for acting. The guy asked the man who he was. He said that he was just taking an active part in the life of the 13th Division. He had no need to worry. The old man wanted to know how they could solve the current problem. Stan immediately realized what was going on and demanded compensation for the damage caused to him. You made money by selling a drawing, but I was searched. Isn't that enough compensation? Stan slammed his hand on the table in anger. If you hadn't stolen my drawing, I would have earned more. It was my job from the very beginning, and you still dare call it compensation. If you tried to buy it from me, maybe I would have sold the division drawing. You just had to ask. The executive director offers to listen to Stan's terms, and they hope that this will not happen again in the future. The guy said that his condition would be that he wants to look at the knowledge of advanced mechanical engineering. The proposal alarmed the old man, but he did not say a word. Stan understood that this was a great chance. The 6 nations and the embryo had different records. Only reliable and trusted people had access to them. This is definitely his future success. If he fails now, he will have to take too long to get the security clearance. Okay, I allow it, the old man said, having thought about the guy's words. Here it is, access to the next stage. Stan was happy to hear the man's words. Wait, I'm against it, said the research director. Advanced knowledge requires level 5 clearance. It's against the rules. He just wants to look at them. Give him 1 hour, during which time nothing will happen to them. This is how their dispute was resolved, and soon the guy was sent to the underground headquarters of the 13th Division. Stan, along with the old man and the executive director, stood at the entrance. Before entering, the director said that he had to read out the rules. The surveillance is carried out around the clock. The guy doesn't even have to try to do anything. The entrance will automatically close in an hour. But this was enough because Stan only needed to look for a couple of minutes in order to learn. The doors opened and the guy walked up to a huge computer. After digging through the system, he found advanced weapon knowledge. The Star Dragon only has 1 advanced material, but it is very good. The system reported that advanced knowledge and synthesis of advanced material had been discovered and offered to study 2 talents. Stan confirmed the study, and the system said that we need to wait a little. A couple of minutes later she reported success. The advanced mission was completed and now the guy can choose one of 3 options: Cannon Master, Mechanic, Mechanical Fighter. The guy, of course, chose a mechanic because in his past life he was the best. At that moment the hero felt his whole body filled with energy. The director didn't understand why the guy smiled so much when reading knowledge about mechanics. The system, meanwhile, reported that the guy's energy attribute had changed to magnetism. A new specialization had been learned, geometric thinking, and new skills had been acquired: energy training technique, immediate mechanical proximity, gliding, and titanium alloy. Now Stan's rank was Class E, superhuman. He had finally taken a step towards his superiority. But don't get too arrogant, because he still has a long way to go. The next day the guy returned to his home workshop. After increasing the level, his aura began to emit magnetism, which is quite unusual for the mechanic class. Aura is the basis of superhumans. After learning the techniques of pumping up the aura, his strength will begin to grow unusually quickly. It's a pity that training requires experience and stamina points, and since he also needs to make weapons, he will be able to train twice a day. Suddenly his phone vibrated. The guy took it in his hands and saw that Lilith said that the captain had been discharged from the hospital, and he was asking everyone to get together. The next day, the hero went to the Star Dragon Secret Service department. The scoundrel who sold the knife told his colleagues that Stan said he would no longer sell him his weapons. Well, just think, he is just a pathetic mechanic. If a man really needs developments, he will pay someone to resell them to him. But suddenly his colleagues turned away from him, pretending that they were working. The guy did not understand their reaction, but it was all because Stan walked past them. A few minutes later the guy came into the room where their squad was gathering. Lilith was already waiting for him inside. A pumped-up man with red hair and a gloomy face asked the guy if he was the newbie. Harry said that this is their captain. In general, they only hire new people if the captain agrees. But the authorities took care of Stan's candidacy, since the captain was then recovering, so he might be a little surly. The man took the Mandarin in his hand and said that he had not introduced himself. He was the captain of a special squad and his name was Wei. Stan thought it was a strange name because it was very popular in China and people often joked that if he was called that, it meant his parents didn't care about him. The captain continued, including you, we will be 5 people on the team. You will deal with logistics and supplies. I will be honest, you have no experience, and I do not believe in your abilities. I will remember all your instructions, and if you do not live up to my expectations, no matter who makes a mistake because of them, I will immediately throw you out of here. Did he really think that you can get everything for money? You can now even get into the Secret Service department through acquaintances. No one thinks about the safety of his subordinates at all. The sullen captain left, and Stan was upset that he was simply perceived as a person with a bunch of connections. Suddenly a notification came on the laptop and Harry noticed it. He sat down to check what was there and said that they had an urgent mission. The authorities wanted them to leave immediately. The captain asked what had happened and Harry said that a squad of the division had been ambushed while preparing to launch a surprise attack on Embryo's base, and they were being asked to provide immediate support. Harry will tell you about the rest of the details on the plane, but now it's time to move out. Suddenly the commander ordered Harry to take care of the rear and Stan would have to learn from him since he was still a newbie. Change is difficult to deal with, so the guy will have to fight for his place in the sun to become useful. Stan only indifferently said that he understood the order, which surprised Harry. The squad walked forward, but suddenly Stan put his hand on Lilith's shoulder and asked them to stop. He opened the box containing the red bullets and asked them to take it as a friendly gift. Are these new developments? Lilith asked enthusiastically and began to examine the bullets. Stan confirmed her guess, but asked not to use them too much for now. The system notified the guy about the start of a Class E mission. He needs to help a secret operations squad pursued by the enemy. His role is to help the team complete the mission. Reward, 8,000 experience points. Harry decided to support the guy and said that their captain was not at all against him, or anything like that. There was no need to take his words to heart. Meanwhile, military vehicles were driving at full speed in the desert. One of the members of the 13th Division looked into the broken mirror and saw how the chase continued after them. Where were the reinforcements? But a special squad was already moving forward. John and an unknown person in an iron suit jumped from the helicopter. The special squad landed successfully, and the robot's voice told the soldier to calm down. Wei pressed a button and his Iron Man suit mask opened. No need to worry. Help has already arrived. Wei contacted intelligence, and they informed him that the Allied detachment was 13 kilometers away. 15 armored SUVs and another helicopter were heading towards them right now. The meeting point is 3 kilometers away on a hill. Their goal is to stop the enemy and successfully rescue the squad. Harry has already sent them the coordinates. Stan looked at the screen and was surprised that they had a prototype of an armored combat suit. This is the only one of the basic copies in Aquaria version 1.0. The soldiers prepared for battle. Wei and the soldiers watched on the hill as a truck was moving towards them. As soon as the vehicles approached a sufficient distance, the commander raised his hand and ordered to open fire. Dozens of machine guns opened fire on the enemy, and a barrage of bullets rained down on the convoy. The commander did not stand aside. Putting on his helmet, he took a heavy machine gun and also opened fire. John, using his armor-piercing sniper rifle, aimed at the tires of the trucks to immobilize them. The convoy of black cars that were pursuing the friendly truck began to slow down and stop. A barrage of fire helped the truck break away from the pursuit. The soldier driving the car looked in the mirror and saw the enemy moving away. He was glad that the squad had arrived on time. Having approached our special detachment of fighters, the soldier looked out of the truck and said that there were too many opponents and they needed to retreat urgently. At that same second, the fighters heard the noise of the blades of a helicopter approaching them. Wei raised his head into the sky and saw an unfamiliar girl with red hair sitting in the helicopter. Instantly a furious attack fell on the squad. The commander jumped to the truck and shouted to the soldiers, "Take cover." By somersaults he tried to dodge an attack that looked like tongues of furious flame. The fighters of the special squad managed to hide behind the cars. But the soldiers were less fortunate. They were subjected to a psychological attack, and at that moment Wei realized that they were being attacked by superhumans. It was hell. She used her power to attack. Tongues of flame enveloped her body, and she had a mark like a snake on her forehead. Harry was shocked by what he saw, but Stan immediately recognized the girl and snatched the headphones from his friend. Having assumed command, he said that the girl was the combat commander of the embryo detachment. "You need to retreat immediately." Wei was surprised when he heard Stan's voice and did not understand what the guy was doing and why he took command over himself. However, he looked at the soldiers of his squad and was surprised how they immediately obeyed the guy's order. But Hell was not going to just let the witnesses go and was already approaching the fighters. The commander of the combat squad was too fast, and her first target was Lilith. Hell immediately tried to attack her with her foot, but the girl blocked with her hands and defended herself. Lilith then tried to counterattack by raising her leg in the air and pointing it towards the enemy. However, Hell was not simple. She deftly dodged. Lilith was surprised that this girl was so good at fist fighting. But before she had time to come to her senses, Hell immediately attacked her in the face, breaking her lip with the help of her power, which enveloped her fist. Coughing up blood, Lilith thought that the difference between them was too great. Even close combat would not give her a big advantage, and she would lose in any case. Hell, meanwhile, was preparing a new attack for her rival, gathering a scarlet aura in her hand. The psychic attack hit Lilith without any problems, and she fell exhausted to the ground. With difficulty getting up from her knees, Lilith prayed to Stan that he would quickly come up with something, otherwise they would end. Stan told Lilith to look for an opportunity to use her mechanical arm, and when the enemy briefly opened up, John should shoot Hell. The fighting beauty followed the guy's order and took out a device from her pocket that activated a mechanical arm. John, meanwhile, knelt down, loaded his rifle and prepared to attack. He held Hell's face at gunpoint and was ready to shoot at any moment. The main thing was to wait for that moment. Hell saw a familiar mechanical hand and stopped for a second. Lilith took advantage of this moment and attacked her. The force of the blow was high, but Hell had difficulty trying to restrain this device. Then she asked Lilith what kind of relationship she had with Zero. "Zero? Who is Zero?" Lilith asked her. John considered this moment the most successful and pulled the trigger. A shot rang out, and Hell tried to react to the sudden attack by creating a scarlet shield around herself. Realizing that the sniper was targeting her spot, she immediately flew away to a safe distance. Hell analyzed the situation and held on to her hand, which was nevertheless hit by a sniper's bullet. Stan immediately ordered Wade to take Lilith and run, to take advantage of the enemy's retreat. The commander in the iron suit understood the order and ran towards the girl. Lilith could barely stand on her feet. Wade picked her up and put her on his back to save her. The soldier who was in the very truck that they had to save shouted to the squad to get into their car. While the squad climbed into the transport, Wei thought that the enemy's vehicles were slower than theirs and, besides, the superhumans were injured. Now they would not be able to pursue them. If the whole squad can reach the plane, then consider the mission successfully completed. When they were in the car, Wei took off his helmet and breathed a sigh of relief. The worst was over. But they forgot about something and Stan radioed for them to look up. The enemies still have a helicopter that is chasing them and can destroy the car at any moment. The helicopter was directly above the car, which was trying to leave at maximum speed. At this moment, the air transport attacked the enemy, firing 2 missiles at the truck. The large vehicle was unable to evade the attack, and the explosive force of the missiles threw its rear end into the air. Trying to hold on to something, Wei shouted at John to shoot them quickly. The sniper replied that he had run out of armored bullets, and ordinary cartridges would not be able to penetrate the target. The helicopter is already targeting the truck. Are they really all going to die here? But then they were interrupted by Stan, who asked if they had forgotten about his gift. Indeed, before the mission, he gave them a box with red cartridges. The squad remembered them and opened it. Having loaded the cartridges into the clip, John decided to try them on a helicopter. The muzzle of John's sniper rifle came out of the truck window, and he took aim at the enemy. One armor-piercing shot, and the helicopter circling above them immediately began to sparkle. The air transport instantly caught fire and, no longer posing a threat to the fighters, began to move away. The soldier who was driving was surprised that the enemies got scared and ran away. Harry said that their plane was already in place, and John, meanwhile, asked into the radio what kind of bullets were they that could even penetrate an armored helicopter. Where did Stan get them? But the guy didn't hear him. He looked at the system window, which reported that the task was successfully completed, and he received 8,000 experience points. Meanwhile, Hell, observing the downed helicopter, radioed that they were on the trail of Zero. The mission ended and our heroes calmly arrived at headquarters along with the rescued squad. Harry admired Stan's coolness. Thanks to him, this mission was completed easily. His admiration was interrupted by a cough from Wei, who wanted to say something. He began to apologize for doubting the guy's abilities. The commander extended his hand to him and told him that without Stan's command and new equipment, they would not have survived. So as the squad leader, he welcomed Stan into their ranks. Stan looked at the commander and replied that he shouldn't have apologized for such trifles, because he was a generous person after all. They shook hands and Wei thought it sounded sarcastic coming from the guy's lips. The awkward silence was interrupted by the opening of the door, and a man's voice was heard from there. Wei asked why the guy came because his squad was currently having a meeting. The same soldier who was driving said that he just wanted to ask if the same cartridges that were used to shoot down the helicopter were for sale. Wei put his hand on Stan's shoulder and asked in a whisper what he thought about it. Stan replied that he was selling his services. One cartridge would cost $50. The soldier said that he wanted to pre-order 200 pieces, of which 20 were for a small caliber pistol, 150 for a submachine gun, and 30 for a sniper rifle. Lilith patted Stan on the back and said that from now on she would attract customers to him for a discount for herself. The guy replied that he would give her 20%, no more. The hero thought that he could earn a lot by selling shells in bulk. Fortunately, he had experience in their manufacture. As long as there was demand, he could forget about the need for money for a while. A few days later, one cartridge fell into the hands of a scientist who knew that the boss did not allow anyone to study flammable cartridges. But Michael believed that he was simply scared, that he would find out that in fact his equipment was being manufactured at a military factory remote from the western capital. He would report to the management, and then Stan would be in trouble. He separated the head of the cartridge. Now you can inspect its components. If everything goes according to his plan, then his superiors will look at him differently, so the guy thought. Suddenly, a loud explosion was heard in the scientist's room, which broke all the windows in the area. A flame appeared in the room. A siren went off, which notified everyone that the fire had started in the workshop. A few seconds later, the authorities were already standing at the door to the room, who asked what the guy had done here. The charred Michael, sitting on the floor, sobbed. Due to the explosion, he lost all his hair and broke his glasses. At that moment the guy realized what kind of trouble he was in. The authorities saw the remains of a red cartridge. They immediately understood everything. The guy dared to take up the study of flammable cartridges. The director demanded an explanation from the head of research, who replied that he knew nothing. The guy did not ask his permission. The man turned to bald Michael and asked if he had anything to say in his defense, but he just sobbed. The director looked at the guy in anger and said that he remembered him. Michael used to be in the logistics department. From today he returns back to his department and is removed from his position. Meanwhile, a guy who once sold a knife to his superiors and framed Stan came into the special squad room. He asked if they would sell him cartridges. Lilith replied that Stan had blacklisted him and didn't want to have anything to do with him, and didn't need an apology either. Then the guy decided to contact other employees, asking them for cartridges. He asked to resell them and offered $200 apiece. But his comrades waved him off and said that they would not sell him cartridges. Another employee said that selling him cartridges would be tantamount to insulting Stan, which is not worth any money, because who knows how many inventions he has hidden there. Realizing that he had acted stupidly by selling that knife then, the man was upset. A few days later, a burned, bald Michael returned to the logistics department with his things. While he walked to his desk, his colleagues made fun of him. The scientist was upset that he had lost his hair and good skin at such a young age. Meanwhile, a conversation was going on at one of the Embryon bases. The man said that the Star Dragon's special agent had a power arm like Zero, and they also destroyed their secret base. Only Zero could give them the secret location, but he did not have that much authority to gain access to this kind of confidential information. The head of the organization looked at the hologram of Stan, where he says that he will destroy them all, and he was filled with rage. He wanted to know who this guy really is. He ordered to convey his order to recruit new recruits. Then he needs to send them to the Star Dragons so that they watch Zero. If they find a clue, then let them tell Alberto about it. Meanwhile, a black car drove up to the workshop where Stan was spending the night. The man reported to the guy that the embryo scouts located in the western capital had begun to act. They were looking for Stan and seemed to know that he was working for the Star Dragon. Stan answered the man that he had already guessed about it. The man told him not to worry because there would be guards nearby around the clock. He was already ready to drive away when Stan asked to help him get 2 Silent Eagle pistols from their warehouse. The man agreed. As Stan watched the car drive away, he thought that the embryo had finally appeared, and he needed to get ready. He returned home and started work the next morning. Stan sat at his desk and made new inventions that would help him in the fight against embryo. After spending several hours at work, the system informed him that he had made an excellent platinum alloy and received 3,000 experience points for it. Stan was delighted with the invention. It was of good quality, and they pay well for rare materials. After a few more hours, he made a folding saber from high-quality platinum. It acquired a new property, increased strength. Suddenly the mechanic was interrupted by the phone. Stan picked it up and read a message that said that the issue of the Silent Eagle had been approved and he was left in the squad room. The hero finished the design and went to headquarters to pick up the pistol. Lilith saw the updated version of the saber and asked to try it out. The first thing the girl did was cut the metal pillar next to her. Her admiration knew no bounds. The weapon was sharp like a razor. It was much better than the previous version. Stan, meanwhile, was testing the gun. He noticed that it had very high power. Lilith brought the knife to the mechanic and said that it was very difficult for her to part with it. She asked if he would bring it next time, and the hero replied that next time he would definitely take it. A little later, in the workshop, the guy thought that now he had enough weapons to cope with people from the organization. He sat on the bed and rested. The system window in front of him notified him that he had practiced the energy training technique and received 4 strength points. Exactly so many points were required before leveling up. At that moment the hero felt a surge of strength in his body. Stan noted that, given the current dynamics of development, by the start of open testing he will surpass the first group of players by a lot of levels. The system window said that the start of closed testing was planned. Its duration would be 12 days. This surprised Stan. Apparently it will be held for a limited number of players a week before open testing. 1 day in reality is equal to 6 days in the game, which means, in terms of game time, there are more than 40 days left before the start. Is it possible that the game clock works differently while the service is disabled? Well, of course, with each version update, in reality a couple of days pass, but in the Star Sea universe, the time span is calculated in years. In this case, with each update I will have much more time for development than the players. Should we start worrying about life expectancy then? Suddenly, Stan's thoughts were interrupted by a system window that reported that the NPC functions were unlocked and the player forum was also unlocked. This surprised the guy. What do NPC functions mean? He tried to find information about it. But the player's forum might come in handy, so Stan decided to register on it. But the system generated an error saying that the player was not detected and registration was unsuccessful. The fact is that accounts can only be created with a unique identifier of the user's dive capsule, apparently registration will not work. Well then, when players appear here, you will need to find a way to gain access to read the forum. Stan went to bed. Meanwhile, in the real world, no one suspected his existence. An unknown guy was sitting in front of 2 monitors and a non-standard chair with wires. The system reported that the character's name was Donald. The normal settings were selected, character creation was completed, and he would soon appear in the beginner's area. The random selection of the birthplace was completed, and the guy who looked like an elf with red hair began to load. The village of Big Horn was chosen as the starting point for loading. A few minutes later, the guy opened his eyes and saw the light of the sun. The system reported that birth was taking place. You need to wait. In the thicket of the forest, a blue portal appeared, assembled from small blue particles. A few seconds later, a player named Donald appeared in this portal, and along with it, dozens of other portals appeared, from which other players made their way into the wonderful world. They went to the Big Horn village, which was the gathering place and was located in the Star Dragon. Players looked around the area and tried to figure out what to do here. Some tried to find clues in the newcomer village. Suddenly the strangers were called by an old man who was slowly approaching them. The grandfather with the cane said that if they want to eat, then they should find a job, because they don't need idle people in the village. Donald looked at the old man and the system window offered him 4 functions: inspect, bargain, talk or kill. He chose to inspect, and the system reported that the old man was a local elder, medium level of danger. Grandfather said that the harvest needed to be harvested, and the sewing and weapons workshops in the south needed experienced specialists. A consignment of goods had just been delivered to the gate. They needed to be unloaded, so there was enough work for everyone. Donald realized that there are a lot of resources in the village of beginners. Closed testing will not last forever. If he wants to get ahead, he needs to quickly develop a start strategy. Explore as many places as possible and arrange yourself more advantageously so that you can then use this knowledge. Having found an axe in the thicket of the forest, the player sold it to a local merchant. After some time collecting all sorts of junk, Donald was able to buy a map of the area from the old man for $3,000. Opening the map, Donald realized that it depicted the territories of the Star Dragon Empire. The closest city to it was Trap Capital. He didn't really have a choice, and the player decided to go there to look around. After some time, he reached the Western Capital Post, where a queue had already lined up. Meanwhile, Stan was sitting next to the post, drinking soda. The hero watched those passing through the security post, and among them he noticed a player who was holding a card in his hands. It feels like someone is watching me, Donald thought, and began to look around. Looking around, he saw a strange guy who was marked as a mysterious stranger, and his name was highlighted in red. Having selected the inspection function, Donald saw that the NPC's name was Stan, but nothing was known about him except one thing: his danger level was fatal. This scared Donald. What does mortal danger mean? Shouldn't the starting town be safe? We need to get out of here quickly. Donald didn't want to die. But suddenly Stan, who was passing by, called him, and cold drops of sweat appeared on Donald's body. Stan said it's rude to inspect someone you're seeing for the first time. Donald took a fighting stance preparing for death, and asked what the guy wanted from him. But Stan didn't want to fight. He said that he needed help and asked if the player had time for this. Donald had too many questions. Had the opportunity really come so quickly? Who is this NPC? Will they give him a hidden mission? Has heaven chosen me? His thoughts were interrupted by Stan, who said that he needed a piece of bread and the guy should get it. At the same moment, a system window appeared in front of Donald, informing him that he had a new task. But why does a high-level NPC have such an easy task? And the reward is small, only $1. Donald suggested that since this is a high-class NPC, the task should be appropriate. Probably it will be a chain of missions. After completing one task he will give another. The player rejoiced at his ingenuity. The years spent in other games allowed him to understand the logic of this game. He opened his inventory and took out all the bread he had with him, and handed it to Stan. Watching the hero's reaction, Donald was sure that he would now offer him a new task. And so it happened, but again it was strange. Donald needs to hit 10 passers-by on the ass, and as a reward he will receive $1. He had no choice but to complete the task. The residents were not too happy about such hooliganism. The next task was to remove the patrolman's pants for the same reward, and Donald, burning with shame, also completed it. While completing the following strange task, the player could not understand why this NPC was giving out such missions. Suddenly the player saw a system message in front of him, which informed him that Stan had opened a store for the player. The hero's assortment was as follows: a folding saber for $30,000, flammable cartridges for 100, a traumatic pistol for 15,000, an assault rifle for 35,000 and an improved rifle for 38,000. The assortment of the store amazed Donald. Very cool things, but it was a pity that they were too expensive for the player. There were also the basics of hand-to-hand combat, and weaponry that could be upgraded and energy training techniques. Donald was shocked to see the skills. Stan looked like a mysterious scientific advisor, and the guy decided that this was his chance. If he learns from the hero, he will very quickly overtake all other players. Donald understood that if he didn't take advantage of the opportunity, he would regret it for the rest of his life, so he decided to become a mechanic and study with Stan. After confirming his profession, the player saw a blue glow appear around him. Stan turned around and went about his business. Donald stopped him and asked where he could find the guy. Without a word, Stan handed him a piece of paper. Donald unfolded the paper, and it was written on it that this NPC was located in the 5th block, Building 46, a repair shop. The player clutched the piece of paper tightly and decided that he would keep this NPC a secret from others. Then during the closed testing he would overtake everyone else. Meanwhile, Stan calmly returned to his home and thought that Donald was a very interesting guy. The hero remembered that he was one of the 20 best martial artists who made it to the semi-finals in China. And now he has moved into mechanics. At first this class is very unremarkable, but if he has a goal, then in the future the player will thank him. As Stan walked by, he noticed the players looking for work, asking a local worker how they could help. It looks like many players have already completed the newbie village storyline. Stan looked at the homeless old man who was sitting next to him, and no one was approaching him. He realized that most players are obsessed with profit, and they don't care about the game itself. These players will do anything for money if Stan asks them to. Who knows, maybe they will even become his main support in the fight against the Embryon organization. Stan came closer to the players and said that he needed help. The guys were happy when they saw the hero, because he looked like a high-level NPC. Stan looked at his system window and realized that there was a limit on the number of awards possible, and he would not be able to set a point total that exceeded it. Just as he will not be able to independently determine the limit, so he cannot now offer a task to destroy the embryo organization. We need to find a way to increase it, and in the meantime, the players are already tired of waiting for Stan to offer them a task. The hero pressed a couple of buttons and the players had a task, but they were not happy with it. They had to get a piece of bread for $1. Disappointed in Stan, the players decided to continue carrying bricks rather than waste time on this guy. Then the hero decided to worsen his relationship with these players. Does refusing a task really ruin a relationship? Such a stingy NPC, the players expressed dissatisfaction. After some time, there was a heated discussion in the workshop. Alice didn't understand why this guy was following Stan. She considered him a good person and asked the hero to give him a chance. Stan, meanwhile, told Donald to go outside and pretend to see seaweed swaying for 10 minutes. While Donald was completing the task, he read that the kin of the Gods Guild pays well, and Stan, meanwhile, noticed that the guy went to read the forum. Donald then said that he would like to find Zero to make money. Having connected to the guy's system, Stan immediately began to look for any news about his identity, and among the pile of garbage he found one interesting one that said that the first Class B task had appeared in the game. I remember the first Class B assignment appeared after open testing. Why was it issued now? Having opened the news, the hero read that the first task of Class B was called Study of Zero. You need to provide any valuable information, and then each player will receive a monetary reward. My presence changed the course of the game, and although the players do not yet pose a threat to me, I should not let my guard down. It's lunchtime. Where are you going? Alice asked. Stan told her that he urgently needed to go to the workshop. Disappointed, Alice replied that he does the same thing every day. Workaholism is a terrible thing. Stan sat in the workshop and tried to learn new drawings of mechanisms. Suddenly a system window appeared in front of him, which informed him that he had provoked a new task, a sudden murder. A killer would soon come to the hero and he needed to survive at any cost. Grabbing the gun, the guy was surprised that this killer was able to escape from the supervision of the 13th Division. It's a pity old man Lou is not at home. Before you worry about players joining Embryo, you need to deal with the killer. Having dressed inconspicuously, Stan went outside, Alice remained in the workshop, so in theory she would be safe. The guy walked into a deserted nook, the best place for a surprise attack. The hero was followed by a mysterious figure in a cloak. Stan felt that someone was watching him and turned around. Suddenly he saw a huge crow rushing straight towards him. The hero expected to see the killer behind him, but not a flying crow. Then a tight thread began to bind the guy while black crows flew around him. The thread grabbed Stan's throat. He tried to free himself, and realized that his enemy was not so simple. While the hero was trying to free himself, a huge glowing cross appeared in front of him. Then the guy heard the sound of waves as if he were in the center of the sea. Stan was suspended by a rope on a cross. Black crows were flying around him, and a huge watching eye appeared above the guy. Is this the reincarnation of Itachi? The guy realized that this was an illusion, and it felt like his opponent's level was the same as Hell's. The more he resisted, the tighter the rope tied him. Stan didn't understand how he could get out of the trap. Would it all end stupidly like that? But suddenly the hero heard an alert sound from the system. She said that the guy is under the influence of an illusion, and since his intelligence is above 50, he can resist these effects. Gathering his strength, Stan freed himself from the illusion, and the world created by his enemy shattered like glass. But not everything was so simple. At the same moment a gun was put to the hero's head. In front of him stood a blond man with a revolver and a brown cloak and a large hat who said goodbye to Zero. The man pulled the trigger, but Stan used a glancing shot and dodged the bullet. The killer did not understand how the guy was able to dodge the shot at such a close distance. It was clear from Stan's smile that he was now in control of the situation. The guy suddenly pulled out 2 pistols that were under his jacket. The hero began to shoot at the enemy, activating the overload skill to cause more damage. But the killer easily repelled the attack by creating a scarlet shield, exactly the same as Hell's. After analyzing the situation, the man realized that the guy was much stronger than the intelligence data said, which said that his strength was at the level of a special agent. The information turned out to be inaccurate, so the killer decided to retreat and rethink the capture plan. Forming a seal with his hands, he again tried to use the illusion on the hero. Zero stopped and saw the sun setting again, black crows appearing and a scarlet thread enveloping him. But his intelligence still exceeded 50 points, and the enemy apparently did not, so the guy easily got out of the illusion. He chased the killer along the road, loading his pistol with flammable ammunition. Turning around, the running man was surprised that the guy continued to chase him and easily got rid of the illusion. He couldn't understand what was happening, and at that moment Stan shot him. The killer again tried to hide from the bullets with his scarlet shield, but suddenly the shield cracked and caught fire. Stan said that he recognizes the strength of a man, but the same techniques will not work on him twice. The killer was defeated. His body burned out on the ground until employees of the 13th department arrived. Carl jumped out of the car and apologized for being late. He asked if Stan was okay. "Does it look like I'm okay?" The guy answered and pointed to his bloody cheek. Carl bowed his head and asked for forgiveness, saying that it was his fault. But the hero reassured the fighter by saying that it was not his fault, because this man was an embryo officer and the best killer who always brought things to the end. Carl recognized from the description of this man whether it was Alberto, the best killer. Unperturbed, Stan confirmed the employee's words. "How were you able to defeat Alberto even after he suddenly attacked you? Are you really that strong?" Stan was indignant that they only now realized this and walked towards the car. Having completed a sudden task, he received a summon card for the character Alberto. The guy considered it a good gift from Embryo. A few seconds later, Carl joined the guy in the car. He got behind the wheel and said that he would first take him to the general headquarters to report the situation. But Stan said that if Alberto found him, then Embryo is aware of his location. Carl replied that this is inaccurate because intelligence hackers control the network and track any information about him. Messages that mention Stan do not go through. The hero turned to the man and asked if he was sure of his words. Alberto would not have acted without permission. He probably passed information about Stan to other spies in the capital, and they were already on a closed network. Or they could personally leave the capital to report to their superiors. Hearing these words, the hero immediately pushed Carl out from behind the wheel, because right now he needs to grab them. At this rate, Embryo will soon find out where he is. Fastening his belt, Stan told the man to ask the authorities to urgently close off the city. Carl hit the glass and asked the guy not to rage because it was unknown who exactly the spy was, and it was not even clear who Stan was going to catch. But the hero did not listen to him and immediately pressed the pedal to the floor. The car pulled away abruptly, leaving Carl behind. The employee did not know that in fact Stan had long ago realized who the spy was. The guy contacted Lilith and ordered her to go to the 8th district as soon as possible. He had already sent the coordinates. The girl didn't understand why she should go to the slums, but Stan insisted that she ask fewer questions. After some time, the hero reached the 8th district, where an abandoned church stood. He drove up to the entrance, where Lilith was already waiting for him. Arriving in her sports car, Stan immediately ran out of the car. Lilith was surprised by the hero's haste, but he ordered her to quickly follow him. The guy opened the doors to the church, which scared the parishioners. He knew that the messenger must be here somewhere. But Stan looked around and didn't see a familiar face. Then he grabbed the nearest guy and asked if Lugorn was here, to which the frightened man replied that he had not seen him here today. Then Stan took his pen and began to draw on a piece of paper. Having drawn a photograph of a man, the hero showed it to the man and asked if he looked like that. Lugorn's eyes were set far away, his nose was crooked, and he had his hair cut short. Realizing that he was not here, Stan and Lilith went to another point. The hero told the girl to contact the bureau and let them check whether he had left the city, and in the meantime the guy would head to the nearest post. A few seconds later, Lilith reported that the bureau responded that such a person had not left the city, at which point Stan warned her that he was driving very fast. She should get ready. Don't underestimate me. I'm a warrior after all. Do you really think that I'm afraid of some kind of speed? Stan grinned and pressed the pedal to the floor, the sports car jerking sharply from its place. Lugorn could not have left earlier than an hour ago. Because he had received information only recently, he had to head to the nearest post, most likely to the northwest. While the hero was thinking about the spy, he just as quickly changed gears and the speed of the car increased. There was the first obstacle ahead. A freight train was passing the rails and it seemed that the car would not have time to pass. Slow down, there's a train, Lilith shouted in tears and panicked. She screamed very loudly like a little girl, but the guy managed to fly in front of the train cabin. Lilith grabbed the handle to hold on. She insulted Stan with all sorts of words. A few hours later, our heroes left the city at a speed of 180 kilometers per hour. Meanwhile, the sun was setting over the northwestern post. People were outraged that they could not leave the city. They demanded to be released. The same person whom Stan had previously drawn panicked. Why was the post blocked? Did Alberto lose? One of the soldiers standing guard suddenly received a notification on his phone. At the same moment, he shouted that they needed this guy when he saw Lugorn. A few minutes later, Lilith's car drove up to the post, and the soldier asked to see the documents of a special agent of the 13th Division. He looked into the car and saw an exhausted Lilith, who with difficulty held out her ID. Stan got out of the car and laughed at Lilith, who immediately vomited, saying that she said she was a warrior, but for some reason she vomited because of a simple trip. Meanwhile, the soldiers detained Lugorn and threw him to the ground, handcuffing him. Stan realized he had arrived on time and pulled out his gun. To the surprise of the soldiers, Stan shot the witness and received 3,500 experience points for him. The guy did this because he knew that Lugorn had poison on his teeth and under his nails. They would not have been able to stop him from committing suicide anyway. The mission is successfully completed, and we are transported to the border of the Star Dragon to the embryo organization, the base of the Black Raven. New player recruits have noticed that the tooltip for the quest to find Zero has changed. The system stated that Zero's location was somewhere in the Star Dragon region of the western capital. The soldier was happy. The search area had narrowed. Let the organization send people there after open testing. They would certainly find Zero. If they complete this B-rank task, it will allow them to leave other players far behind. Meanwhile, the leader of Embryo was unhappy when he heard the news about Zero again. Do you think I will give up now that you have defenders? Enraged, the villain slammed the table with a powerful blow. Find out his exact location, even if he is hiding in the headquarters of the 13th Division. Send 200 OWL agents, 5 commanders there and kill Zero. I authorize the use of short-range guided missiles. I will stop at nothing. The next day at the headquarters of the 13th Division, Star Dragon, Stan looked at the information in the system, which said that closed testing was completed and the next open testing would be only in 122 days. The guy was right. When updating, the real time does not correspond to the game time. "Why are you moving your finger in the air?" asked the department director, who was clearly not in a good mood. He asked how much secret information Stan knew about the embryo. The guy replied that the organization knew about his location. The specific location is unknown to them, but they are sure that it is somewhere in the western capital. Therefore, they will probably send more killers here to complete the job that Alberto failed to complete. The director of the 13th Division asked what the guy was going to do in this case. Stan took off his mask and said that he would no longer hide and stand against Embryo. The director forbade doing this because it was too dangerous. But the guy raised his hand, in which he was holding the remote control, and pressed the button. A map appeared behind the bosses and Stan showed a base in the Black Crow Valley, which is located on the border. It is large and completely different from the 3 that he had already dealt with. The guy personally wants to take part in its destruction. The director replied that this was madness, because then Embryo would take advantage of the fact that the guy himself came into their hands. Stan smiled and said that he could create one thing that would change his appearance. The director's cheekbones ached from the guy's pathos, and he replied that he should do this thing first, and only then they would talk. After a short interrogation, the hero returned to his home, to his workshop. The guy understood that the majority of the Star Dragon's management would agree to attack the base in the Black Crow Valley. It is located quite close to the newcomer's loading point. By destroying it, the number of players who join the embryo during open testing will decrease significantly. Passing by Old Man Lu's room, the guy noticed that he was at home now. This was a good moment. Entering the room, he timidly called the old man by name. Then the guy said that he wanted to borrow books on mechanics from the owner to read. The old man was lying on the sofa and drinking wine. He asked the hero why he needed these books. Looking at the old man's imperturbable face, Stan realized that it would not be easy to persuade him. He needed to come up with a worthy answer. But suddenly the old man just stood up and told the guy to follow him. Walking into the next room, Lu pointed to a shelf of books and said that they were here on the shelf. He allowed Stan to choose the books himself, but on the condition that he return them to their place and not spoil them. The guy thanked the old man, but he himself didn't understand why he was so accommodating today. As he left, the old man thanked the guy and asked him not to tell Alice that Stan had taken the killer away from the workshop so that the girl would not get hurt. The guy began to study the books. As always, it was enough for him to simply flip through the pages to study all the knowledge on mechanics that was inside the book. After a couple of minutes, he finished and put the books back. All the mechanical skills went up in level. Now it's time to improve and create a new drawing. The system asked if the hero wanted to merge abilities: basic biochemistry, basic optics, basic materials science, and the basics of digital electronics. The guy agreed. Basic knowledge, covering 3 sections, has strict requirements for the level of knowledge. In addition, only a mechanic is able to carry out the fusion to obtain a drawing, and Stan succeeded in this. He invented a smart optical mask. The next day he returned to the 13th Division, the secret department. Wei asked Harry if he had sent the report, and the guy replied that he had sent it a long time ago. Suddenly someone knocked on their room. The director entered the room and turned to Stan. He had already said that it was dangerous for him to take part in the operation, and asked if he had created a thing that could change his appearance. The guy grinned and asked the director to wait here for a minute. He turned away and pressed the triangle located on his forehead. Just a couple of seconds, and he was transformed. Stan turned to the guys and they were surprised at what they saw. His facial features changed and now he did not look like his former self. The hero asked if he could join them now. The director came closer to take a closer look. He also admitted that Stan now did not look like himself. The man smiled and said that this is a good thing that will be useful to them in production. Will Stan sell them the drawing? The guy waved it off, saying that it was an ordinary mask. Why do they need a drawing? After all, they can do this themselves. The director agreed with this statement, and the guy just smiled imperceptibly. In fact, this mask not only changes its appearance, but also scans the faces of other people, storing their features in memory. But it is better to remain silent about this function. One day it will play into your hands. The director headed towards the exit and said that now the guy can join the squad on this mission. There is still half a month before the start. It is better to prepare properly. After he left, Lilith tapped Stan on the shoulder, saying that this was a very cool thing, and she asked the guy to let her play with it. Stan asked the girl not to make noise because he had something very important to say. He approached Wei and asked him to send his armor prototype, the guy would adjust it. Hearing such a proposal, Wei immediately became happy and asked what he would do with his armor. Stan replied that he would first improve energy efficiency, adjust the power mode, make the armor lighter, add to the skeleton to make it easier to move, then check the tracking and fire control system so that his long-range weapons would have homing. If there is time left, he will also install a basic melee weapon. Such improvements made Wei's eyes light up with happiness. Stan took out his phone, typing something in it, and said that if the commander has no questions, then first you need to pay for the assembly. Then he showed the phone and said that from Wei there were $360,208, but they would come down to $360,000. The commander's eyes popped out of his head when he saw the figure. The commander said that everything was cheaper before, and Stan asked if his parents were alive. Wei replied that they had died a long time ago. Okay, do you have any brothers and sisters? No, I'm the only child in the family. Maybe you have a wife or girlfriend? No, Wei cried. Unfortunately, I'm all alone. Then why should you save money? These words struck Wei right in the heart, and he agreed to pay to keep him quiet. John took the sad commander away, and Stan said that he would go prepare equipment for improvement. The guy also asked his allies not to disturb him for a while he was busy. 10 days have passed since this conversation. The hero was busy with inventions. His phone was lying on the table and seemed to be vibrating due to incoming messages. Lilith wrote messages one after another. She asked when the guy would stop playing hide and seek and when Stan would start working on a pile of orders. Everyone called her. But Stan did not pay attention to this. He improved his inventions. The grenade now explodes with a delay, breaking into fragments. The folding saber is modified and is now more compact. The hang glider is modified. Its compactness is also improved. The lightweight power arm has also been improved. Now it can start shaking upon contact with a target. And the outer coating is now made of a platinum alloy, which increases its strength. The gun was strengthened. Now it became more powerful and long-range. From the new invention was electromagnetic armor covering the body. It could cover any part of the body by passing magnetic force, which increased the strength of the wearer's body, and they also withstood high temperatures and radiation. Such weapons will certainly frighten the embryon. Now you can move forward. The day of the mission arrived. The employees were waiting near the train at the station of the western capital. The blonde contacted his superiors and asked why the others were still not there. Suddenly he saw a huge black truck heading towards them. The soldiers were surprised to see such a cool car, which was in service with a special detachment. The heroes boarded the train and went to the site of the planned attack. Let me introduce myself. I am leading your squad on this mission. My name is Howard. Everyone was assembled, so the commander decided to discuss all the details right now. We will work together with the Military Intelligence Department of the Valley. They are already on the border and are ready to move out at any time. Our task is to quietly penetrate enemy territory, determine the location of the guards and report information. Intelligence sent them a map. The topography of the Black Crow Valley makes it impregnable, hiding it in a dense forest. The exact location of the base could not be established through aerial photographs. Since we do not know either the exact coordinates or the level of military power of the enemy, we will have to carry out a ground invasion. The unknown girl was sipping her drink and noticed that, judging by the data provided, the enemy base was strictly guarded. It was the special agent of the 13th Division of the Star Dragon Kira, who asked if the strength of the reconnaissance squad would be enough for the attack. Howard exhaled and said that the squad would not agree to this. Evil Lilith asked the girl why she was asking stupid questions. Did she have any other ideas? Howard said that near the Valley of the Black Crow there is a village, the Crow Forest, in which many wanderers live. Since it is located near the base, there are scouts of the embryo. They could find out the necessary information. These 3 candidates would be perfect as informants. Howard pinned the faces of 3 guys to the board. The first target is the main leader Mark. He has martial arts at level E+, and uses a blade with the name The Soul of the Blade. The second target is his deputy Cedric, and their leadership has little information about him. And the last candidate is the head of Cody's security. He is fluent in various types of small arms. He is a very well-trained special agent. The Valley has sent a special reconnaissance team, and they will join us upon arrival. Wei asked if the 2 teams of special agents would work together. Lilith was also interested in this question, whether the second detachment would become a hindrance for them. But her question was interrupted by an abrupt stop of the train. causing the girl to hit her seat. Why did they stop so suddenly? Are they really under attack and need to prepare for battle? Having come to her senses, Lilith suddenly saw the reason that stopped their train. A huge black earthworm with many red eyes broke through the train window and wanted to feast on delicious girls. Black earthworms had strong armor, the attribute of darkness, and they did extra damage to metal elements, such as a train, for example. Stan didn't expect to meet such difficult monsters on his way. One of the worms found its first victim. It devoured a soldier who begged his allies to help him. Other soldiers nearby had already arrived and the commander ordered to open fire. The guys looked out of the broken window and opened fire with assault rifles. A hail of bullets rained down on the giant worms, but the bullets seemed to simply bounce off their dark armor. The commander also noticed this and shouted that the bullets could not penetrate them. The armor was too strong. At that moment, Lilith appeared, ran to the window and asked everyone to get out of her way. The fiery girl pulled out her folding blade and jumped straight at the huge worm. She stabbed with the blade and the worm growled, receiving minor damage. Lilith shouted that they could somehow be penetrated in close combat. Let the squad urgently come up with something. Kira jumped out of the window and shouted that the worms were afraid of fire. They urgently needed to be set on fire with something. John got the hint. He just had a couple of supplies that had set an entire helicopter on fire in the past. The man crouched down, took aim with his sniper rifle and shot at the huge worm. The dark creatures immediately set themselves on fire and began to scream so that the entire area shook. John continued to shoot, 1 cartridge per worm, and the set fire monsters returned to their holes in horror. Lilith breathed a sigh of relief. It was good that John was with them with incendiary cartridges. Now they were saved. The train, although damaged, was still able to continue its journey. With difficulty, the damaged train reached the railway station in the morning. The guys looked out the window and saw that the people here were dressed completely differently. Girls here wear bikinis, and guys wear open tops. Morals here are clearly more relaxed. The guys were greeted by a man in a straw hat. He introduced himself as Patrick, from the intelligence department. He escorted the guests to the command center because it was necessary to provide a report upon arrival. Suddenly Harry and Stan looked at the soldiers who were guarding the building. They clearly looked unfriendly. One of them held a machine gun at the ready, and the second spat when he saw the guests. They went up to the office, where Patrick reported to the colonel that agents from the Star Dragon had arrived. The colonel, as if not paying attention, said to take them to rest and make sure that they did not wander around the area. Patrick followed the commander's orders and showed the guys where they would sleep. Harry asked the guys if they also thought that the soldiers looked at them unfriendly, and the colonel was completely indifferent. The blonde explained that the fact is that in the past the Star Dragon had disagreements with the valley and now they do not like each other. Now everything was clear. Harry said that now all that remained was to concentrate on the task. So now they should take a break. Stan stood up and told the guys that he would go and smoke for now. A few minutes later the hero stood near his truck and smoked a cigarette. Suddenly he received a notification from the system. The guy opened it to read it. The system reported that he had received a group assignment. It was a small military operation. As a member of the 13th Division and a participant in the operation, Stan had to pay attention to what he could do. Looking through all the points that said about reconnaissance in different areas, the hero was glad that he had finally received his first group task. At the end of such a task, a reward will be given based on individual statistics. Often it is very generous, so you need to show yourself well and get more rewards. Suddenly the guy heard the sound of women's heels approaching him. In front of the hero stood a girl of African appearance in a short skirt and short top. She asked where the guy came from. Was it from the Star Dragon? Stan didn't even move and said that he was one of the squad that came from the Star Dragon. At the same second, the girl grabbed a knife from behind her back. Like a cobra, she quickly approached him and put a knife to his throat. The ardent stranger asked why he didn't dodge, to which Stan replied that he had no need to dodge. The girl smiled. "Do you think I won't dare to cut you?" Stan grinned, and his neck began to become covered with metal particles. He told her that she could try to attack. Suddenly the girl heard the click of the shutter at the level of her belt. Stan held the gun against her stomach and was ready to shoot at any moment. The girl introduced herself as Vinna, a special agent for Valley Intelligence, and Stan also gave his name. After that, she quickly hid the knife, turned around and left, saying that she would remember the guy's name. Stan finished smoking and also went to his room, and meanwhile Howard was watching all this. He was glad that their meeting did not confuse him at all and did not strain the relationship. The guy was strong and showed himself well. Vinna walked past the truck where Patrick was sitting. The man asked how the test went, and the girl replied that this Stan was a pretty tough nut to crack. The next day, 2 detachments went to the gathering place. Patrick said that as soon as everyone is assembled they can begin. They have a reliable stronghold in the Raven Valley. He also drew attention to his colleague's car, saying that it was very remarkable. Howard began to boast, saying that it was really not bad, and besides, the Star Dragon is full of such cars. Kira and the blonde felt ashamed of the commander because, of course, they did not have such machines. Having discussed the further route, the guys got into the cars and set off. The squad from the valley went first, and the squad from the Star Dragon was at the rear. Stan was driving, calmly smoking a cigarette. Lilith noticed that he was driving calmly today. This made her happy. Harry got out of the back seats and said that their colleagues' cars had already disappeared and they needed to catch up. But Stan didn't see the point in this because his colleagues would still have to stop to wait for them. Kira mockingly asked little Lilith where they went. Are you catching up or does Stan not know how to drive? But the guy didn't seem to have any enthusiasm. He replied that he just didn't want to waste gas. The blonde asked Wei to influence the situation because his colleagues were already starting to bully them. Commander Wei supported him. The only one who was against it was Lilith. She remembered the last trip. Wei did not understand what she was afraid of. Lilith replied that she just wanted to stay alive. Well, since everyone is asking, Stan decided to speed up a little and recommended holding on tighter. The car rushed forward. Lilith screamed and said that they would still regret this. In a split second, a huge black truck overtook the entire convoy and took the lead. The soldier, seeing this speed, was surprised that such a large truck could go so fast. Lilith screamed at the top of her lungs like a little girl. She asked to stop because she wanted to go out. Harry huddled in his seat and asked Stan to drive slower. But the driver did not listen to them, but continued to overtake all the convoy vehicles. The speed was so high that the car even took off from the ground for a split second and Lilith's voice was heard from its windows, begging for mercy. After some time, the truck stopped at the gathering place in the Crow Forest. Lilith immediately looked out the window and a rainbow poured out of her mouth. At that moment she only wanted to die. The whole squad barely got out, and the girl recalled that she said that they would all regret it. Wei asked with difficulty whether Stan had ever driven an SUV before. Stan chuckled and replied that he had only ridden mechanized, controlled robots before. John could barely lean on the truck. He said that if the guy touched the steering wheel again, he would jump out of the car. Stepping away from the high-speed ride, they arrived at the rooms that were assigned to them. Patrick said that this place is pretty miserable, but we need to be patient. And now let's move on to the pre-mission briefing. There are 2 tasks. The first, disguise yourself as wanderers. Sneak into the village of Crow Forest and find out information. The second, in the vicinity of the valley you need to find the watchmen who were left alone and interrogate them. Vinna said that they would deal with the sentries, and let the people of the Star Dragon go to the Crow Forest. Stan realized that they had dumped the most difficult task on them from the very beginning, because they were not familiar with the area or with the inhabitants of the Crow's Forest, so they risked not only returning empty-handed, but also falling into the hands of the enemy. It's easier and safer to catch a sentry. Everyone is silent, probably also aware of the possible benefits and losses. Patrick said that since there were no objections, we could begin. Each squad should leave 4 people at the base for support. After some time, our detachment went to the Crow Forest, to the village of Wanderers. Kira said that the newcomers will immediately be noticed, so first you need to find a place where they will settle. Stan said that it is quite normal for wanderers to be interested in the surrounding state of affairs. If they deliberately hide, then on the contrary they will arouse suspicion. Kira agreed. But the village is large. Where should they look for the Embryon Scout? Stan answered her that there is a casino in the south. There is a bald man in it. He has all the necessary information. Towards evening, the heroes arrived at the luxurious casino of Wanderers, located in the Crow's Forest. It was quite noisy in the hall. Everyone wanted to win, but of course not everyone succeeded. The squad watched the residents playing in the casino. Kira said that the scout might actually be here. Suddenly Lilith, who was watching from the balcony, saw the target they needed. In the distance sat a bald man who was having fun in the company of 2 girls dressed as bunnies. Without thinking twice, Lilith immediately ran, pushed off from the fence, and jumped towards the man. Without talking, she fell on the guy and twisted his arms, which greatly frightened the bunny girls. Stan exhaled and took off his headphones. It seemed there had been no incidents. He asked Harry to replace him while he slept. Meanwhile, in another place there was a watchtower. Near the tower, a soldier lay in a pool of his own blood. Vinna and other soldiers ran towards the tower. The girl told the squad to act quickly. A few minutes later, the area was replenished with a couple more patrol corpses. Patrick was sitting at the computer. He was hacking the embryo network, namely the base, which was located somewhere here. After finishing downloading the data, they hurried to get out of there. Vinna was happy that this time the results of their squad would surpass the results of the people from the Star Dragon. Meanwhile, at the embryo base in the Valley of the Black Crow, one of the soldiers reported to the man in the monocle that their network had been invaded. He asked what was stolen from them, and the soldier replied that the coordinates of the base location, a diagram of the base, and a laboratory journal were stolen. Cedric, sipping tea, replied that it was nothing. Their enemy had swallowed the bait, and now all they had to do was wait for the fish to bite. After the report and tea, he went to his colleague's room. He reported to the man, who was wiping his sword, that their external false server had been hacked, presumably by people from the valley, who would probably begin an invasion soon. They stole false data, but the existence of the base was revealed. Cedric would recommend to the chief to begin the evacuation, take away all equipment and information. The main performer of Embryo marked through the rag and said that if he was needed to join the fight, then Cedric just needed to be told. Meanwhile, the sun began to rise over the base where our detachment was located. Stan lay and looked at the system window, which reported that the task had moved forward. The guy asked Harry how everything went yesterday, and he replied that they managed to find out the specific location of the base in the valley. But those whom they caught were of low rank and did not know any particularly secret information. The disappointed hacker leaned on his arm and said that this was all the result they had achieved. This was expected by Stan, because if they had learned anything, then the task called Reconnaissance 2 would also have been completed. Suddenly the door opened and Vinna entered the room with a flash drive and said that they had obtained top-secret data about the Valley base. This information amazed Howard. His colleagues were ahead of them. Patrick said that Vinna took the prisoner and the mission was completed. Now their squad can return. They will collect all the data and transfer it to the military of the Valley. Stan suspected that something was wrong here. The panel indicating that Reconnaissance 2 was completed did not appear. Something was wrong with their information. The hero asked his colleagues to confirm the accuracy of the information and tell them about the progress of the operation in detail. Vinna said that of course they would tell everything. Several minutes passed and everything was explained to the guys in detail. It seemed to Stan that the mission went too smoothly, perhaps that the data was unreliable, but Vinna did not think so. Most likely the enemy was simply not ready for a surprise attack. It's just that this time victory is theirs and Stan is just suspecting everyone and everything. Apparently he doesn't really like losing. Stan looked at the girl and replied that it was just intuition. Patrick said that distrust is a good thing, but since there is no evidence, there is no need to go too far. In short, the investigation is completed. Tomorrow at dawn they are leaving. Well, no, apparently Stan will have to figure it out himself. It was a quiet night outside. The moon was lighting up the sky and the song of crickets could be heard. But in addition to the song, in the silence of the night, 2 shots were heard from a sniper rifle, which killed 2 soldiers. The muffled shots continued, the sniper accurately working on the target, killing one guard after another. Stan had killed a lot of the guards. He knew that soon people would have to be sent from the base to check the situation. Crouching behind a stone, the guy put the rifle on the ground and took out a fishing line when he heard a noise near the bushes. A sentry patrolling the area was looking for whoever was shooting. At that moment Stan jumped out from behind. He wrapped a fishing line around the sentry's neck and began to choke him. The unfortunate man tried to get out of the trap, but his efforts were in vain. Just a few seconds later he died and fell to the ground. The hero turned the poor fellow over, took off his cap and activated the triangle of the mechanical mask on his forehead. In the radio that was lying nearby, I heard someone reporting that it was clear in the northwest. The next sentry said that it was clear in the southeast, but one sentry was silent. Stan transformed into a sentry, raised his radio, and reported that a dead sentry had been spotted in his position. A few minutes later, several trucks arrived at the scene looking for traces of the enemy. They could not find anything, and then the commander ordered to get into the car and return to the base. Stan got into the car with them and drove to the base of the hostile organization. Cedric walked along the corridor with his secretary. The girl told him that 13 sentries were killed. The man was surprised that the enemies received the necessary data, but still stayed and continued to try to find out more. But the secretary grinned and replied that no matter how vigilant their enemies were, they would not know which information was false and which was true. In any case, they would fall into a trap. The head has already prepared for evacuation. Reinforcements will arrive in 5 days, then it will be possible to retreat. In the meantime, Cedric decided to prepare a huge surprise for their enemies. After some time, the car in which our spy was located arrived at the base. The guy suggested that if Reconnaissance 2 was not completed, then there must undoubtedly be a secret place at the base. Civilians are collecting equipment, and the soldiers remained on cover. This is strange. The people of the valley invaded yesterday. This time would have been enough to evacuate. But why haven't they left yet? One of the workers asked if they had received an evacuation order. Another guy replied that the authorities said that contact with the scouts in the village of Crow Forest was lost. Apparently everything was heading towards a battle. The worker turned to Stan and called him Taramond. The guy asked if they had found anything, because he had just arrived from reconnaissance. Taramond, it seems, was the name of the person who owned this face. Stan approached the worker and replied that there was no optimistic news. The enemy had killed all the sentries. The hero understood that the ordinary workers who are here most likely do not have secret information about the base. It is worth targeting the key figures of the authorities. The guys sat down to rest after hard work, and one of the soldiers said that he envied the civilian personnel, because they would be able to evacuate first. Suddenly a man with a tattoo on his face called out to them, asking why they were resting and ordering them to start carrying things. It was the base commandant named Cody. Stan recognized him immediately. This is one of the 3 people Howard was talking about. If the base has secrets, then important people like him should know them. The fighters got to work. Stan said that he would go to the restroom, and one of them was not happy about this, thinking that the guy did not want to work. The hero walked away from them and followed Cody to understand where he was going. Cody didn't notice the hero and continued to go about his business, Stan carefully following him. The man walked down another corridor and entered the door. Stan followed him and was suddenly surprised. Cody just disappeared. He definitely walked in here, but there was nothing in this room except ammunition. Stan realized that there was probably a secret door here, but where? You can't linger. Someone could come here at any moment, and it would be bad. So the hero launched several mechanical beetles. He didn't think that these trinkets, made from improvised means, would be useful to him. Bugs with cameras crawled around the room to hidden places. Stan came out, sat on the stairs and took out a tablet. Watching the cameras through his tablet, he saw a door open in the wall and 2 men in suits came out. Stan carefully followed them. These 2 must know something. It's time to reveal the mystery that shrouded this base. The men headed out of the building, Stan carefully following them. Suddenly he was called by one of the fighters who threatened that he could not leave the base without a task. Stan showed the key and said that he had just encountered those 2 men. They dropped the card. Now he would give it to them and come back in an instant. The sentry let the hero in. The men went outside the base. Stan caught up with them, showed them the access card and said that they had dropped it. One of the commanders began to touch his pockets. Indeed, there was no card. He thanked the soldier for his work. But to the surprise of the men, the soldier pulled out a knife from behind his back. Stan tied the prisoners to a tree and threatened them with a knife. The commanders realized that the soldiers were not from their base and began to call the guards for help. There are only mountains here. Scream as much as you like. No one will come. Lay out all the secret information you know. The guide burst into tears and replied that they were ordinary employees and knew nothing. Then Stan put a knife to his throat and said that he knew about a secret door in the storage room. The hero began the interrogation. The prisoners screamed so loudly that the local crows scattered in all directions. After a few minutes they decided to tell everything. One of the men was unconscious, and the second was sobbing from the humiliation he had experienced, while Stan checked the system window. Having received all the necessary information, he returned to his appearance. Reconnaissance Mission 2 was completed, and now everything became clear to the hero. The night passed and the sun rose over the Allied base. Harry knocked on the body of the car. He tried to get through to Stan so that he would open the car, but Lilith said that she did not see him in it. The guys realized that Stan was missing, Howard asked the commander what they were going to do about it. Wei replied that they had no choice but to wait for him. Kira disappointedly asked if it was necessary to wait for him. In response, Wei shouted that Stan had the car key. Meanwhile, the Valley soldier approached Patrick and reported that one of the Star Dragon soldiers had disappeared. The squad wanted to stay and wait. Patrick asked who exactly was missing. Because they had agreed to leave together, they needed to return the loss. The soldier thought about it and said that the agent who wears the mask, his name Stan, has disappeared. Vinna found it suspicious that this guy rejected the obtained data for no reason, and today he disappeared. Maybe he is a spy. The Special Forces soldiers arrived at the base and headed straight to the Valley's operations center. They did not wait for Stan to return. Arriving at the Commander-in-Chief's office, they reported that one agent from the 13th Division had disappeared all night and had not returned. After we returned from the mission with information about the Black Crow Valley, he left without saying anything. His behavior was extremely suspicious. The commander replied that a little later he would ask the Star Dragon for information about him. But for now let them report on what they found out. Vinna said that their prisoner had already been tested on a lie detector, which means he did not lie to them. They stole the data from the network enemy, therefore they can guarantee their reliability. The commander-in-chief shouted that in this case it was necessary to immediately attack the opponents before anything changed. Patrick was indignant. If we attack agents from the 13th Division now, those remaining in the strong point will be in danger. But he only grinned evilly and replied that to achieve the goal, it is quite possible to sacrifice a couple of people from the Star Dragon. They are not one of us. There is no need to worry about them. The sun had already risen high in the place where Stan was, and he realized that he was a little late. The guy grabbed the two men by the rope and lifted them up. The bosses had already guessed that this guy was the sane escaped Zero. The hero climbed up a small hill with the prisoners and put the radio on the ground, tuning it. Taking out the phone, he tried to contact the base, asking to answer if he could be heard. Wei grabbed the phone and started shouting into it, asking Stan where he had disappeared all night. Everyone had already left, and they were left waiting for him at the strong point. Howard intervened and took the phone from the captain. Stan reported that he had made his way to the Valley base and obtained secret data. The base is divided into internal and external. The internal sector is its core, located deep in the mountains. Low-ranking personnel do not know about its existence. The communication route between sectors can be closed at any time. In the internal sector, the network has many escape routes through which managers can escape unnoticed. Hearing the report, Howard immediately contacted the colonel via radio. The colonel allowed the connection and picked up the phone, saying that he was listening. Howard said that one of his squad members had discovered important information that the colonel should know about, so he needed to talk to him personally. He understood who he was talking about and decided to listen to the guy. After the report, the colonel with a frowning face asked the guy how he knew this information. Stan replied that he had infiltrated an enemy base and captured 2 internal staff, but the colonel shouted that he was lying. The hero also understood that they would not believe him, because the colonel's people were sure that he would never have been able to pull off such a thing. They don't know that he can change his appearance. Copying facial features is his trump card, which should not just be revealed. Howard, listening to the conversation, began to panic and asked his soldier if he had evidence. The guy replied that he did. These were 2 prisoners. Then the colonel ordered them to be brought. Howard breathed a sigh of relief when he learned that his subordinate had at least some evidence. But the colonel did not take into account the information received and said to order all troops to move forward. Their goal was the Valley of the Black Raven. Hearing these words, Howard froze in place. He was amazed. Snatching the phone, he shouted that he was against it. His people were still there. The colonel was deliberately putting them in danger. But the man firmly told him that Howard is not the one who decides here and hung up. Stan, listening to the beeps on the phone, realized that the colonel was eager for immediate results. This means there is little time left. You need to have time to leave the combat zone. Almost a whole day passed without news. It was already evening. Harry and Lilith stood at the strong point near the car. Suddenly the heroes were surprised to see a familiar guy approaching them. It was Stan, who was pretty exhausted. He was dragging a hostage in one hand and carrying the other on his shoulder. With difficulty, the guy ordered the guys to take the boss's cards and penetrate into the inner sector of the base. They needed to find out more about the embryo's plan regarding evacuation. Harry fearfully said that he had no experience in espionage. Let someone else go. but Stan said that he was the only hacker, so no one else could cope with this task. The heroes packed their things, Stan created masks for them, and they successfully entered the base in the Black Raven Valley. Harry, in the guise of a boss, was nervous. John told him that the more nervous he was, the higher the chance that he would be discovered. The guys approached the base door and used the card key. The digital lock successfully read it and opened the door. The guys calmly got inside. Harry was glad that there were no incidents. After some more time, 2 of the 13th squad penetrated into the very center of the base. Harry was surprised by the secret passage. It turns out that the inner sector actually exists. Suddenly the siren rang. Harry was scared, but John calmed him down by saying that the siren did not go off because of them. Cedric told his secretary that he heard that the enemy had sent his troops to them. They were about to arrive. We have already sent an armed group to meet them. They will be able to hold off the enemy for a long time, and you are preparing to evacuate. When Cedric and his secretary passed our fighters, Harry contacted Stan, saying that the Valley squad wanted to engage in battle with the embryo. They had better get out. Wei was indignant. This is too much. You helped them get information, and they did not care about your safety. Stan answered the guys that they were near the base. They could get hurt in a skirmish, so they should get out of there quickly. Suddenly the hero heard the sound of approaching cars. Harry shouted into the phone that his comrade's car had been found, but Stan had already seen the light of the approaching headlights. One of the soldiers in the enemy vehicle shouted that they had located the enemy and ordered all the other jeeps to catch up with him. The chase began. Lilith pressed on the gas and tried to break away, but the organization's soldiers were catching up with them. The machine gun bursts of the soldiers covered the car with fire. The girl panicked when she saw that the enemies were catching up with them, but Stan told her not to worry, because he installed nitrogen acceleration. Lilith was shocked that he was able to install it on such a huge jeep. The guy tried to press the acceleration button, but the girl stopped him, saying that they were in the mountains and would most likely get into an accident at that speed. Therefore, we had to dodge at basic speed, but the soldiers were getting closer with every kilometer. Then Stan grabbed one of the suitcases and asked Wei to change into mechanical armor. Just a few minutes later, Wei jumped out of the car wearing new armor. Taking out his machine gun, he began to pour a barrage of fire on the enemies. Several vehicles immediately stopped. Wei told Stan that the characteristics of the new armor were very powerful. It was worth the money. The squad leader ordered to open fire and destroy first the guy in the mechanical suit. The soldiers opened fire, but Wei easily defended himself with a shield. When the enemy's machine guns went to reload, Wei took out his machine gun and again rained down a hail of bullets on them. The vehicles were defeated, but new pursuers appeared over the horizon. There was no end to their troops. At that moment, Stan realized that it was time to try out a new development, a delayed action projectile. Dozens of bombs that looked like balls with a propeller flew towards the enemy like real drones. When the timer ran out, they rushed, and all the cars that were within the affected radius rose into the air. Stan was delighted to see his new development in action, at which point he received many messages from the system, which awarded him points for destroying the enemy. After some time, jeeps of a friendly detachment arrived from the valley. One of the soldiers was surprised at such firepower. They saw dozens of overturned vehicles and how one truck could handle them all. But the colonel was not surprised and ordered the remaining enemy to be destroyed. The artillery on the roofs of the Valley Squad's trucks prepared for battle and rockets were fired from it at the enemies. But Stan's truck was also in the affected area, and the guy realized that things were bad. He shouted to Lilith to press on the gas and turned on the acceleration button, trying to get away from the missiles. 2 missiles narrowly missed the truck and landed behind it, creating a huge fireball that destroyed everything in its path. Fortunately, the truck was not damaged, but a huge crater covered in fire formed in the place where the missiles landed. The damaged truck stopped. The guys needed time to catch their breath. Stan received bruises, like his entire squad, but they escaped with minor scratches. The hero was angry that the allied squad decided to blow them up along with the enemies. The truck started moving and headed to the base. The observing headquarters was glad that the guys were not hurt. Howard grabbed the microphone and shouted to the colonel that this had all gone too far. He would be held accountable. The colonel replied that he was just doing his job and did not need instructions from the Star Dragon people. Then he ordered the victims to be taken to the medics when they arrived. After some time, Stan's squad arrived at the logistics squad's camp. They were given first aid, The hero was examined, but no serious injuries were found. The guy threw his backpack over his shoulder and was about to get up. But suddenly he was stopped by one of the soldiers who said that they could not leave. The colonel ordered to heal their wounds. Stan replied that he did not obey the colonel's orders. Then the soldier said that Commander Howard also ordered them to look after the squad and give them a rest. The hero bowed his head and smiled. Apparently old Howard fears that he will again take risks on the front line. Then the hero went to the nearest radio and contacted his spies via a secure channel, asking if they were still alive there. Harry replied that, unfortunately, they were still alive. Stan asked what the current situation was at the base. At the base, meanwhile, the sounds of shots from dozens of machine guns were heard. Harry reported that the outer sector was fighting off the Allies, and other employees had retreated. The exact evacuation route had not yet been announced, so for now we could only wait for everything to become clearer. They also found out that the information obtained by the Allies about the defense of the base was a fake. If they blindly followed it, they would suffer heavy losses. Stan asked if the hacker told management this. He replied that not yet. Stan was the first to find out. In that case, don't tell them anything, the hero answered. But why? The hero explained that the Allies deliberately put them in danger. They could have died. Harry still couldn't believe it. But John supported this decision. Since they do not hide their intentions to finish them off, then they are not obliged to help them. Meanwhile, the battle between the Valley troops and the Embryo organization was in full swing. Bullets were flying everywhere and shells fired by tanks were exploding, but it seemed that the Valley squad was beginning to gain the upper hand. The soldiers moved further and further, and then one of the commanders ordered to storm the base. The guys who took part in the assault were glad that the enemy's defense was very weak. They were lucky that they got the information. The assault was successful, and the fighters of the enemy organization fell one after another, dying in their own blood. There was an explosion. The commander shouted, "The outer wall was blown up, let's go in." The squad ran inside when suddenly one of the soldiers saw a mine at his feet. Dozens of explosions thundered. The detachment storming the building was blown up by mines. It was an ambush. Soldiers of the organization appeared from the windows and opened fire on the enemy. Their ruse was a success, and the Valley fighters took the hook. Allied soldiers were dying under a barrage of bullets. They were open, and the enemy was behind cover. The commander shouted to his soldiers to continue the assault and not to be afraid. Stained in the blood of his soldiers, he shouted that he would avenge every fallen comrade. A soldier of the organization who was watching the battle told the command that they were in trouble. The ambush worked, but many opponents had invaded the base, and not all of their people had yet managed to evacuate. Mark, having heard the disappointing report, decided to go outside and stop the enemy. Meanwhile, the Valley soldiers had already entered the building and exchanged fire with the enemy. Suddenly Mark appeared in front of them, who had prepared his sword for battle. There was a smile on his face. He had long wanted to warm up. One of the soldiers recognized the man, saying that he was the main performer of Embryo named Mark. The commander realized what kind of enemy they were facing and shouted to the squad to concentrate fire on him. But Mark didn't seem to be afraid of the bullets. He was too fast and agile and easily dodged them, and with his first movement he killed one of the Valley's fighters. Having broken through the enemy's defenses, Mark began to cut down his opponents one by one. A few seconds later, the entire assault squad was defeated. Mark looked at the corpses of the people of the Valley. For him they were just pathetic weaklings. The performer threw the katana over his shoulder and headed towards the exit. Going out into the street, the formidable samurai, stained with the blood of his enemies, assessed the situation. Their base continued to be stormed by enemy troops. At the same second, 2 tanks opened fire on the enemy. Mark, like lightning, jumped towards the enemy and easily cut through the shells flying at him. At that moment, Cedric contacted him, who said that all the employees of the sector had been evacuated. If he did not want to fight, he should quickly leave with them. Mark turned around and walked towards the evacuation zone. The wounded soldier behind him reported with trembling hands into the radio that the 3rd squad had encountered Mark. Then he said that the entire squad was killed. Patrick was surprised to hear the report because there were 200 people in this squad. How could one man defeat them all? Observing the situation, Vinna noticed that the data on the location of the enemy's defenses diverged too much from reality. Patrick was forced to agree that their information turned out to be fake. Embryo used its own people as bait, cruelly. The colonel was too radical. He should have listened to Stan. Then maybe they would have saved the people. After some time, he reported to the colonel about the losses suffered and that the information they had received earlier was partially unreliable, and it was worth listening to Stan. But the colonel did not care, because the result justified the losses. He said to order the soldiers to carefully check the wall of the base. If the internal sector exists, it should be destroyed. The surviving soldiers began to examine the premises in search of a secret passage. One of the soldiers was indignant, because they had been looking for him meter by meter for the second hour. If he really existed, they would have already found him. After some time, this information was also conveyed to management. Having heard the report, the colonel ordered Stan to be brought to him. But there was just one nuance. The fact is that the logistics squad reported that Stan injured 2 guards and went missing. The people from the Star Dragon who were there say that they did not see him leave. The colonel was furious. You non-entities, there are so many of you out there, but you couldn't keep track of one person. Meanwhile, a lone military truck was driving towards its target. He was led by Stan, who had a tablet on the next seat showing the location of John and Harry. A few hours later, towards the morning, a black jeep was driving far from the organization's base. Cedric said that all important employees had left the base, and now it was time for the people of the valley to sign for his gift. After these words, the villain pressed the button. At the same moment, the organization's base blew up, everything in the area exploded, all traces were destroyed. The colonel watched this through the laptop screen and couldn't believe his eyes. He tried to shout into Patrick's phone, asking what happened and whether the man was alive. Patrick answered with difficulty that there were a lot of explosives in the internal storage of the base. The base had just detonated. Everyone was killed. His soldiers were buried alive. Huge losses. The colonel cursed the enemy. At the very last moment they made all their losses meaningless. These bases were also destroyed. Moreover, it was he who commanded the operation. The colonel understood that he could not avoid accusations. With trembling hands he picked up the phone and contacted the 13th Squad. He asked what other information they had. Wei replied that 2 of their agents had infiltrated the evacuated detachment. When they found out exactly which route they took, they would report. The colonel replied that he would wait for news. The damage from the operation is much greater than planned. The result needs to be more significant. This is the only way I can atone for my guilt. Intercepting the enemy is a good opportunity. Group your troops, immediately go to the vicinity of the base and wait for orders. Meanwhile, the convoy of jeeps from the embryo organization was moving further and further from the base. Cedric said that the soldiers of the valley never doubt that they are right, so they fell for his trick. But Mark advised him not to let his guard down. At that moment, John, disguised as one of the bosses, looked out the window holding a tablet in his hands. He tuned into the frequency of the jeeps that were driving behind him and swiped his finger on the tablet. At that same second, the employees' ears began to ring. Something had happened to the communication line. Suddenly, they saw the Valley Squad vehicles appear behind them. He immediately grabbed the phone to report that their convoy had been intercepted. But from it he only heard the noise of interference. The guy told his friend that he was unable to contact the command. His colleague replied that he should not panic because they had a spare transmitter. However, they were never able to contact them because at that moment their car was blown up. Cedric, seeing the overturned burning car, could not believe his eyes. Where are the people of the valley from here, who betrayed us? Mark climbed out of the car window and tried to fight off the jeeps that were catching up with him. They tried to escape, but there were more valley soldiers and besides, a rocket was flying at their car. Mark managed to react in time when he saw her. He grabbed Cedric by the hand and jumped out of the car, and at that very second it exploded. Another missile was flying towards them, but Mark managed to turn around and cut it in half. This won't work, there are too many of them, the performer thought. If all these jeeps squeeze us into a ring, then we are finished. We need to get out of here. Mark grabbed Cedric's hand and said that they needed to run. The evacuation plane had already arrived. The villains tried to hide. They went into the forests where it was difficult for cars to get through. However, turning around, Mark saw that they had not managed to break away from all the cars. One single car was still chasing the fugitives. It was Stan who was watching his targets through binoculars. How is this possible? How did they catch up with us? Maybe this is a reconnaissance vehicle. Mark grabbed Cedric again and shouted that they needed to quickly go deeper into the forest, where they could hide their tracks. Meanwhile, Stan took a detour and, having arrived at the right place, he stopped and got out of the car. He took out a map of the area, on which there was a red dot. This was the only road that passed here. The hero calmly took the rifle and suitcase and followed to the right place. He opened the suitcase, which contained his new mechanisms, which had performed well in the recent battle. The guy began to take them out and bury them one by one, connecting them with a rope. Watching through binoculars, Stan said that he had enough time. All that was left was to wait for the prey. After some time, Cedric fell and said that he could no longer run. Mark told his friend that there was very little left. The hangar was already close. The exhausted guy replied that Mark could only inform him. Suddenly the sound of a large caliber rifle was heard from behind the bushes. Mark, being a deft fighter, managed to react in time and dodge. But not everyone is as clever as the main performer. The bullet hit Cedric in the back and he fell to the ground, rolling his eyes. Stan rejoiced at the victory. The first target was eliminated, and the system informed him that he received 4,000 experience for killing Cedric. Mark ran up and tried to revive his comrade, but his attempts were in vain. The man's rage knew no bounds. Looking at the nearest hill, he realized that the shot came from there. Having abandoned the corpse of his comrade, Mark rushed towards the hill to take revenge. His speed was high. He couldn't let the enemy escape. Stan, seeing the enemy, also realized that he was approaching too quickly. The guy opened fire on the enemy, but Mark deftly dodged the bullets. From those bullets that the man could not dodge, he blocked them with the help of a red shield, which we had already seen earlier from other Embryon commanders. Stan also remembered this shield, reminiscent of snake skin, which he had already fought with. The hero fired a couple more bullets from the machine gun, but Mark blocked them with the blade of his blade. The enemy was approaching. Stan realized that it was pointless to shoot, and, throwing away the machine gun, ran away from the enemy. Mark grinned. "Did you decide to run? It's too late to run away from me." But in reality it was a trap that Stan had prepared for the enemy. Running behind the nearest stone, he immediately took out his tablet and activated his mechanical devices. To Mark's surprise, explosions were heard under his feet. These were the detonation of the bombs that Stan had set when he arrived here. Although Mark was agile and fast, he couldn't avoid a dozen explosions. To Stan's delight, the system began to inform him that Mark was receiving 34 damage from his bombs. The hero tried to read information about the enemy, but unfortunately for him the difference in their levels was too great, and he would not be able to find out enough information. Therefore, the system suggested that he raise the level to 28 for 520,000 points, and the hero agreed. The system reported that the level had been increased and now the hero received 10% of stamina, armor, strength and agility. The guy knew that Mark was 10 levels higher than him, but he was not in the best shape. There was a chance to kill him. Meanwhile, Mark made his way through the minefield and jumped out of the smoke screen. The wounded warrior jumped and raised his katana above his opponent's head. He struck, but Stan managed to dodge by crouching, using his ability sliding fire. Mark bared his teeth. "This guy is fast. He was able to dodge my attack in an instant." Jumping back, Stan lost no time and pulled out a pistol from his bosom. Pointing the pistol at the enemy, he fired, trying to catch him by surprise. But Mark was not simple and immediately called on his red shield, repelling the bullets. Then Stan realized that this was a losing tactic. Mark's body was very stable and could not be penetrated by ordinary weapons. This means that you will have to change the bullets to flammable ones, because it already worked once. Mark was surprised that the guy had the nerve to reload in front of his face. Deciding to teach the impudent boy a lesson, he jumped at lightning speed and attacked him. Mark's blow was accurate, and he easily hit the enemy's body. The man thought that the fight was over, but when he felt that the katana was stuck, he turned around. The katana crashed into the plate armor that protected Stan's neck. The commander was surprised at how quickly it appeared. Having successfully blocked the attack, Stan quickly jumped away from his enemy. Taking out his second pistol, he opened fire on the unprotected enemy. Mark smiled. He knew that bullets were useless against him and summoned his scarlet shield. Suddenly, bullets pierced the shield and pieces began to fly off. Mark was stunned. Stan fired 2 more times and 2 bullets hit the shield next to Mark's shoulder, at which point the shield caught fire. Mark was immediately engulfed in flames. His body was burning, and he screamed at the top of his voice, calling on his spiritual energy. "Do you think you can shake off the flames with your energy? It won't work with your level." Mark looked at the burning clothes and did not understand why the shield could not protect him. Throwing off his burning clothes, the commander thought that he was spending too much energy on defending himself, and needed to finish him off as quickly as possible. The powerful warrior rushed to attack the enemy despite the fact that his shoulder was still burning. At that moment, Stan ran out of ammunition and had no choice but to dodge the next attack by somersaulting. But the katana blade was able to touch the guy's face, and the system reported that the mask was damaged. At that moment, Stan realized that he couldn't play it safe in a fight with this guy, so he grabbed his jackknife and prepared to fight. The wounded Mark saw the real face of the enemy. The mask was damaged and now did not hide who was underneath it. The two swordsmen clashed in a duel. Mark realized that Zero had been in front of him all this time. The man was confident of his victory because he had no equal in close combat. He asked Stan if he was upset that he still couldn't die. The hero was analyzing the situation at this time. Delayed action shells and flammable bullets took away approximately half of Mark's health. Therefore, you need to continue to attack until an opportunity for capture arises, and at one point it turns up. Do you think you can stop me with your weak hands? Mark shouted, and his powerful fighting spirit energy threw the hero back. The fighter's endurance was amazing. The force with which Stan was thrown was so great that he flew another couple of meters and crashed into a tree. But the guy was not going to give up, and as soon as Mark tried to attack him, he immediately blocked the attack. The villain struck and hit Stan's hand. It was quite painful. If not for the second-generation mechanical hand made of titanium alloy, the hero would have lost his. Taking hold of his blade more firmly, the hero jumped more furiously at the enemy, but the man did not yield. However, Stan managed to notice the trembling in the enemy's legs. His block did not go as well as before. Apparently he spent a lot of energy and weakened. The guy's attacks had an effect, and the armor will help him hold out for some more time. Therefore, Stan began to put more energy into his attacks and wear down the enemy even more. Mark began to feel short of breath, and from his appearance one could understand that he was fighting with all his might. Stan saw the enemy's fatigue. He realized that this was his chance to win. The hero called up a system window on which there was a card of a familiar man in a hat. Alberto's summon card appeared in the guy's hand, which he immediately activated. It is unclear where the crows appeared, and a cross with a red eye in the center appeared in front of Mark. The rope bound the man and nailed him to the cross. Mark knew that this was Alberto's ability. But he died. How is this possible? Stan smiled. The guy used this ability because he knew that a martial artist of his level cannot have more than 50 intelligence points because he only developed agility. And now his stamina is 0 and he cannot use spiritual energy. That is why he will not be able to get out of the illusion. The hero activated his other reboot ability, and instantly his mechanical arm was filled with power. The full power of the prosthesis crashed into the face of the immobilized Mark. The force of the blow was so colossal that the villain flew out of the dome of illusion. Bleeding, he struggled to get up. He looked towards Stan and was surprised. At this moment, the hero was already flying towards the villain with his sharp blade. There was no way Mark would have had time to dodge because he had no strength left. The hero pierced the villain's body right through. Finally, the grueling battle was over. The system reported that Stan killed Mark level 38 and receives 21,000 points for this. In addition, he killed an enemy 10 levels higher than him, and for this he receives an additional 58,800 points. Also, his individual contribution to the battle was 99%, for which he received an additional 58,212 points. Suddenly our hero saw a walkie-talkie that was lying near Mark. The main villain appeared in it, asking his subordinate whether they were evacuated or not. At that moment, the villain saw Zero and immediately recognized him. He asked if the guy had killed Mark and Cedric. The man was also wondering where the hero's data about the base came from. The guy didn't answer anything and told him to guess. Do you think these methods can harm our organization? How naive. If anything, I have already destroyed 4 of your bases. I could crush you with my own hands. We have plenty of executive directors. You won't be able to bliss forever. For bases, Stan repeated over and over again, mockingly. The rage of the head of the organization knew no bounds. In a fit of anger, he overturned the table along with the laptop. Then he called one of his subordinates and asked him to convey his order to everyone. Increase the reward for Zero's capture to 5 million. After some time, the hero collected his things and began to accept all the rewards he received for a successful mission. He did almost all the tasks himself, so he gained quite a lot of experience points. Suddenly the system reported that the calculation of statistics was completed, and he did this task perfectly. This surprised the guy. Indeed, this time he was given a good reward for an excellent grade. There were 3 skills to choose from: enhanced spirit, enhanced body, or fast pace. A strengthened body will increase health points, and an enhanced spirit would be useful for magic or telekinesis, which he does not use. But agility increases the range of attacks, as well as the speed of reaction. This is exactly what he needs, so the hero chose a fast pace. He also looked at what was there regarding the main plot task. The hero saw that he had progressed by 2%. Not a lot, but the Valley base was an important supplier of new players for Embryon. By destroying it, we slowed down the pace of expansion of the organization. After some time, trucks of the people of the Valley appeared on the horizon. The colonel, who was sitting in one of them, thought that many people had died under his leadership. This would certainly affect the lowering of the rating. Therefore, he decided to report that the Star Dragon's people were operating under his command. Anyway, they won't find out what he wrote in the report, then his rating will not change, and maybe even increase. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by a walkie-talkie, which reported that 2 corpses had been found ahead by the side of the road. The soldiers of the Valley looked at the spectacle with their mouths open, and Stan's squad hurried to quickly see what kind of corpses were there. The colonel was also amazed to see such a picture. Lying in front of him were 2 commanders from the Embryo base, Mark and Cedric, both of whom had a large cut on their backs left by a sword. Harry immediately realized that it was Stan's hands. Lilith also guessed because only he could deal with them in a one-on-one fight. That's his style. It's just not clear why he left them by the road. A feat is a feat, but all the achievements will be appropriated by the people of the Valley. The colonel was already anticipating his reward. He was glad that the guy left such a gift, which he would certainly accept. The man ordered his subordinates to take the corpses and load them into his car. The guys approached the corpses and began to lift them, but suddenly one of them was surprised and shouted for everyone to move away. After all, when they lifted Mark's body, they saw that there was an anti-personnel mine lying there. The soldiers immediately began to run away so as not to be hit by the explosion. But the mine did not work, and then the colonel ordered one of the soldiers to inspect the device. The trembling soldier carefully began to approach the mine, because an order is an order. He slowly crouched down and extended a trembling hand towards the device. An interesting way of clearing mines, of course. He began to lift it to check. Suddenly he felt that the mine was too light. It should be much heavier, as if it were fake. The guy calmly lifted it into the air and said that it was empty, which scared everyone who was in the area. Patrick, with his hand rewound, laughed and asked who decided to play a joke on them. Stan's squad laughed with the colonel, because they realized that this gift was left by their squad member. The colonel got angry and shouted that there was nothing funny here. Meanwhile, on a hill nearby, someone pulled the bolt of a sniper rifle. Stan raised his rifle, took good aim at his target, and pulled the trigger. The bullet flashed like lightning, tearing up the grass in its path, and the colonel turned around when he heard the shot. Before he had time to turn around, his skull was torn apart by a large caliber bullet, like a ripe watermelon. The colonel fell dead, and his subordinates watched this terrible picture, frozen in place. Stan lit a cigarette, lowering his sniper rifle. Looking at the dead colonel, he said that what goes around comes around. Having finished smoking, the guy threw away the cigarette. He thought about the fact that he hid in the Star Dragon from the pursuit of the embryo. He was able to successfully ingratiate himself with the authorities and acquire their advanced technology. At first glance, you can say that they trust me, but there is a bug hidden in the mobile phone they gave me. Now that Embryo's attention has set its sights on the Star Dragon, I have no reason to go back there. The hero took the bug out of his phone and crushed it with his foot. There are still 3 months before testing opens. The Star Dragon task is a gold mine. You need to quickly advance in it and accumulate more funds. The guy opened his bag and took out a glider that he had made in advance. Having taken the glider, the hero thought that, in principle, the available funds were enough for him to begin with, so it was time to leave. After all, the world is huge and all roads are open. The hero opened his glider and flew in an unknown direction. Congratulations, you have finished watching the first season. The big task in the valley was completed and the guys returned home. Everyone except Stan, who was right now in the conference room being discussed by his superiors. Stan goes out of his way to get himself into trouble. It's good that he didn't leave evidence, Otherwise the people of the valley would not have agreed to reconciliation, said one of the bosses. But the other guy thought that Stan did a good thing. The director coughed loudly, hinting that it was time to shut up. Then he asked if Stan's location had become known. The gray-haired man nervously replied that they traced the signal of the bug in his phone, but it was interrupted 24 hours ago. Stan must have found it and thrown it away. He decided to call and ask his partner again. The man dialed the number and asked Harry if the hero had contacted him. Harry replied that he called him this morning. The man was shocked to hear this news and asked what Stan told him. Harry said only one phrase. The hero conveyed that he had gotten away from harm. The silence in the hall was interrupted by one of the bosses. Is this because of the murder of the valley colonel? Is he afraid that we won't be able to protect him? Another man suggested that this phrase sounded like an excuse to run away. Suddenly one of them showed the director a laptop, in which he saw that the reward on Stan's head had suddenly increased 5 times and now stood at $5 million. The increase in reward is obviously related to the destruction of the base in the Valley of the Black Crow. But how did Embryo know about this? There is a spy among us. The director interrupted his colleagues. He suggested that if the reason for his escape was that Embryo would come to settle scores, then the fear was justified. For now let's leave his identity a secret. Don't give out information about him to anyone and send a search team after him. Meanwhile, far away from the Star Dragon was the resort town of Morrowind. Stan changed his appearance. He carefully thought about the many things that need to be done before the start of open testing in 3 months. First, you should complete special tasks ahead of the players, for which they often give out rare skills and abilities. Fortunately, I haven't forgotten them yet. How to pass, the hero thought as he poured wine. Afterwards, I will need to strengthen the supply channels for parts so that I can complete tasks while on the road, thereby automatically earning experience. And for selling a drawing of a folding saber, you can get a black and gold card of the Feish group, which will cover the financial issue for a while, in addition to finding time to wreak havoc in the Embryon. The most important thing is to increase the reward limits for published tasks so that I can use players from the beginning of open testing. This will only be possible if I improve my reputation. So far my reputation is at 0. But if you wisely use the rules for its accumulation, then in 3 months it can be increased. After some time, the guy arrived at the department of the Feish group. He entered the luxurious hall and approached the butler, giving him a list of things he needed and a card for payment. In the Star Dragon, the hero managed to accumulate a lot of money. Now he doesn't have to worry about money. How nice it is to be rich, Stan thought. Meanwhile the butler said that taking into account the black and gold card discount, the total cost would be $80,000. Soon their specialist will deliver the goods to the room. Stan added that he also wants to buy an entrance ticket to the Darknet Blood Pact Society. The Darknet is an underground world of intelligence relay that maintains neutrality. The butler looked at the guy and said it would cost $200,000. The Blood Pact Society is an organization that hires killers. If you provide documents, you can become a contractor. Having paid the money, Stan received a coin from the organization. Previously the players called it the Union of Killers. After receiving the coin, the system reported that the hero had unlocked a new reputation for the camp and now he was a preparatory level killer. The easiest way to increase your reputation is to get to the top of some lists, for example, to the first places in the ranking of killers of the season. The hero went to one of the luxurious hotels in Morrowind, the Vitalia Hotel, where they kindly opened the door and asked him to enter. Hotel Vitalia has branches in major cities in 6 countries. The organization behind it is the Darknet. The butler Sebastian looked at the guy in orange rags and said that they had no vacancies. Stan knew that a common man would never be able to rent a room here. Looking at the butler, the hero asked if they really had no places. Handing over his coin, he asked them to check again. Sebastian first looked at the coin, making sure that it was real, then his cold gaze looked into the guy's eyes. Kindly extending his hand, he asked Stan to follow him. They went up to the top floor. Sebastian said that first the guy should register. They approached the luxurious table. The butler took out a list and asked them to add their details to it. Stan will also need to choose a codename for himself, the most difficult test for all gamers. Stan said that his name would be Apostle Level Observer number 9527 of the Scarlet Empire in the Caldan Star Cluster. Having heard such nonsense, Sebastian kindly asked the guy to shorten his name. The hero thought for a moment, and replied that then his name would be Black. Unfortunately, this option is taken. What about Mr. Black? This option was also suitable for our hero. Okay, Mr. Black, now you are a preparatory level assassin. Complete the task, you will get the scorpion level. Private work is also allowed, but in this case we will charge 5% of earnings. Before you take on the task, you can read the terms and conditions. Sebastian handed the tablet to Stan, and he was surprised at what he saw. His name was first on the list of assassination orders and was marked with a hot offer icon. The coordinates indicated that Zero was located in the Western capital, in the Star Dragon. I didn't know that they were offering so much for me. Embryon is still prowling around in the Western capital. They are wasting their time and energy in vain. Sebastian reported that Mr. Black had received a task. The reward for it was 100,000. Very few. Apparently someone is not able to hire an expensive killer, and decided to try his luck with a newcomer. Okay, since they pay little, the task will not be difficult. Stan said that he accepted the task. The butler replied that the employer wished to discuss the details in person. The meeting was scheduled in one of the restaurants in the city where the hero soon arrived. My target, Eugene, is in Morrowind, with 12 to 20 bodyguards with him, in which case this payment is not enough. Stan's client was Shui, a middle-aged man who looked exhausted from frequent stress and said he didn't have much money. Stan stood up from his seat and said that he would take on the task, and he also asked to wait for him here. Shui was delighted with this news. He asked the guy how many days he needed to wait. The hero turned around and coldly said that by the time Shui finished his lunch, his target would already be dead. The guy left the restaurant. Not believing what he heard, Shui ran out after him. This guy is too self-confident. Maybe you shouldn't trust him. Suddenly, a male voice called Shuya and someone touched his shoulder. The intimidated businessman turned around. In front of him stood a pumped-up guy, whose body was covered with scars. He said that he had thought about everything again and decided that he would take on his task. He had some free time. Shui got scared and said that he had already given the task to another mercenary, to which the man turned around and said that if so, he was leaving. If anything else was needed, he could contact him. Suddenly someone called the stranger, and he picked up the phone. The customer asked if the killer had time to work. The client forwarded the dossier to the target, and the mercenary was surprised to see that Shuya had been ordered to do so. Coincidence? Apparently the timid businessman's order was to kill Mr. Eugene. Eugene asked the mercenary what he thought. Would he take on this order? The cold-blooded man replied that he was taking on this matter. Then Eugene wanted to negotiate payment, and in the meantime a sniper scope was aimed at his head. Suddenly the mercenary heard a shot thunder through the receiver. He tried to shout out to the suddenly silent Eugene, but the client would never answer him again. The bodyguards were shocked. Their master was killed. We need to call everyone here and find the killer. The mercenary hung up. Someone beat him to it, but Eugene had many guards. The man knew that for the money that Shui had, he could only hire a novice killer. The mercenary wanted to see who it could be who quietly eliminated Eugene. A few minutes later the police were already at the scene and had cordoned off the area. Police officers drove away ordinary residents who came to watch the murder. Some even took photographs, which the police were not happy about. One of the employees said that the killer could not hide in the middle of the day, and meanwhile Stan walked past people. Thanks to his copy mask, he could sneak away unnoticed while the police here slowly sorted out what happened. After some time, our hero returned to the restaurant, where he was given a task. Shui was amazed that the guy actually completed the order so quickly. He quickly took out a case with money and asked if the guy would count it. In addition to the money, the hero also received 25,000 experience points for successfully completing the task. Stan said he doesn't have time to count the money, so he leaves. As he was leaving the restaurant, the hero felt as if someone was watching him. Looking around, he noticed a strange man with green hair who was reading a newspaper. The man was watching him, and then Stan looked at him with a menacing look and asked what he wanted. Seeing such a terrible face, the mercenary was frightened. An animal fear ran down his spine. Stan went further, and the mercenary still could not get over the horror that he experienced. This newcomer has terrible energy. He is damn dangerous. After some time, the hero arrived at Vitalia's hotel to report on the completion of the mission. Sebastian said that since the newcomer has completed the task, he is now at the level of Scorpio. Greater powers will be available to you. From now on in Vitali's hotels around the world you will be treated as an elite person. This is the first time I have seen someone rise in level so quickly. I will look forward to your further achievements. Stan didn't seem to listen to the man. He was worried about his current place in the ranking of killers. Sebastian replied that only killers of the highest rank are on the list. You are still in the 1000th place. Young people are in such a hurry to rise to the top. I remember that now the first 10 places on the list should be occupied by killers of approximately level 40 with mediocre abilities. Only 3 of them are relatively serious opponents, since their strengths are close to the upper limit of version 1.0. The rating is based on completed tasks and other achievements. The butler thought that he had somehow offended the newcomer, so he decided to cheer him up. Sebastian said that, judging by how the guy coped with the first task, a bright future awaits him. But the hero was thinking about his own things. He realized that now he needed to complete as many tasks as possible in order to move up the list. Stan asked Sebastian to show him new missions. The man suggested that he wanted to see more serious missions. He handed the guy a tablet and said that all the tasks are located here. He can choose. Beginners are encouraged to start with something simpler and gradually move forward. But you show promise, so you can look at something a little more serious. Stan quickly scrolled through the list and said that he was choosing this task, without allowing Sebastian to finish. The butler took the tablet, and despite it said that this task would be perfect. But then he looked at what task the guy took and was shocked. Stan chose the task of finding a battle rose. This is a group of mercenaries that needs to be completely destroyed. The task was of high complexity and many mercenaries have already died doing it. The butler started shouting that the guy didn't understand what simpler means. A lot of experienced killers died on this mission. Where should a newbie take it on? I would rather choke in your spit than be killed by the enemy, Stan replied. Help me get ready, and leave the rest to me. The butler looked menacingly at the newcomer, but he could not help but give out the task. So without a word, he took the guy's coin and placed it on the scanner. Then he put a stamp and, folding the sheet into a tube, said that he warned about the complexity. If something happens, it is not his fault. The butler then placed the tube into a contraption that delivered a message through an intricate network of pipes. The Central Information Department accepted the new report and entered the mercenary's name into the network. When the information about the Battle Rose task was updated, the butler reported that the guy had been registered. The system reported that Stan called for a mission to eliminate the Battle Rose. In the Sumo Desert there are various groups, including wanderers and mercenary fighters. But what in this devastated land has attracted so many groups? Perhaps this has something to do with incidents in the past. The hero must explore the desert area. The guy continued reading the description and saw that in addition to experience, it also contained an unknown reward. This was already becoming interesting. The guy realized that since there was an additional reward, the task was not easy. You couldn't act at random. You had to be properly equipped for insurance. The hero went to the base of the Feish group. In his main class, he reached the maximum level. The conditions for promotion this time were not easy. There was no need to waste experience points on creating useless drawings. They are already difficult to obtain. In the next task, Stan will not have partners, so you should stock up on different cartridges for different situations. In parallel with the development of new devices, the guy studied intelligence data about the Battle Rose group. All of its personnel are women. The base is located in the depths of the Sumo Desert. There are a lot of enemies there, and they have their own mechanic. So the guy decided that he should create a directional weapon. The system asked if the hero wanted to combine abilities: basic electromagnetism, basic spatial sensing, and mechanical theory. The guy chose an affirmative answer. The combination was successful, and he created electromagnetic combat scanning goggles. This was not what he wanted, but would still be useful to a sniper. Stan ran the combination again. The system reported that the combination was successful and the mechanic opened the electromagnetic pulse interference equipment. But this is an interesting device that is perfect for confronting enemies in the desert. The hero thought that mines would also be useful to him. He could try to create a drawing of them himself. In order to create a homemade drawing, you need to take your knowledge and the basics of creating drawings and make a new one. The guy worked hard, trying to create a mechanism. But the system repeatedly reported that the creation of a homemade drawing had failed. But after a few hours he succeeded and created a flaming poison mine. This is exactly the drawing that the hero needed. From now on he can create others specifically for his needs. But here we can disagree. Having collected all his equipment in one place, the guy decided that the preparations were almost completed and now he could go on a mission. He packed his suitcase and called Antonio from the Feish group. saying that he needed a cargo plane. Antonio replied that they only use them for large-scale operations, even though Stan, an elite person, would have to cover the costs. The hero said that he knew about this. Then Antonio asked how many people should be transported and by what time the plane should arrive. The guy said that he would be alone and would leave now. This is a huge expense. Renting one time will cost $50,000. Are you sure about this? Without hesitation, Stan replied that he was sure and sent the money to the organization. After some time, our hero was already flying over the desert in a cargo helicopter. Looking out of the helicopter cockpit, the guy observed the situation through binoculars. The data is correct. The base of the Battle Rose is strictly guarded. It is impregnable. It will be difficult to get there by storm, but you can set up an ambush and lure them out of hiding. Stan ordered them to go down to the designated area and then prepare an SUV for him. Antonio understood the order. Their base is nearby, and he needs to go about his business. Meanwhile, 4 jeeps were driving through the desert in which a female voice asked if Dorothy had any results, or if everything was the same this time. The girl, whose name was Dorothy, replied that they had searched 3 sectors. There was no sign of Felonia. 2 of her squad had died with Gadong's people. Her ally with pink ears like a cat began to cry, saying that they had lost many during the search. What is this felony anyway? Is it worth the lives of those killed? An elderly woman with long elf-like ears looked at the girl with a cold gaze. She realized that the girl was not local and said that there was once an oasis here. We lived in abundance. But the war changed everything. The legend of my homeland says that in the depths of the desert are hidden traces of an ancient civilization and its treasures, which have the ability to control the desert. Many military men came here in search of traces of Felonia, and we, who lost our homeland during the war, became mercenaries for them. We give our lives to search for Felonia for them, and in return we receive resources for subsistence and shelter for our families. Felonia is our hope for future life. At the same time, Stan was digging holes in the sand and placing his new homemade mines there. Having finished immersing the mechanisms, he took out binoculars to assess the situation. The guy saw 4 jeeps on the horizon and realized that his prey had already arrived. The hero quickly hid behind the nearest stone. The trucks drove past a strange lamp-like device, and at that moment the mechanism began to sparkle. An electromagnetic explosion was heard, and lightning from the mechanism swept across the area in a large dome. All equipment immediately turned off and the radios were no longer available. Is this really Gadong? Dorothy thought. It's strange they haven't done stalking before. The girl grabbed her axe and jumped out of the car, ordering her fighters to get out and prepare for battle. Stan reloaded his machine gun and opened fire on the devices. The new mines he created immediately detonated, causing damage and filling the air with gas and ash. The entire nearby area began to become covered in purple clouds of smoke. The girls began to cough. Some of them managed to cover their noses, realizing that they were being attacked by toxic gas. But not everyone had time to react. Those who inhaled a lot of toxic gas felt dizzy. One of the girls fell to the ground unconscious after feeling dizzy. Her friend saw her fall and tried to call her, but she herself was getting worse and worse. Soon many of the girls from Dorothy's squad were lying on the ground unconscious, and only the commander and a few fighters remained combat ready. Suddenly she heard someone open fire, 1 bullet at a time, killing immobilized targets. Dorothy was scared. She urgently needed to understand where the sounds of the shots were coming from, and looking at the nearest hill she saw a dark figure. Dorothy understood that she couldn't stand still. She needed to urgently kill the sniper, otherwise he would kill them all. The girl, along with the survivors, rushed to attack, but Stan stopped some of them with a barrage of bullets. Only this didn't stop Dorothy. She ran with all her might and shouted that the guy was going to die. Stan realized that she was too close to him, and the cartridges in the machine gun were out, so the hero quickly grabbed the pistol. Dorothy, taking advantage of the guy's hesitation, quickly jumped and swung her axe. But Stan managed to use sliding fire and escape the girl's attack. The guy then shot her with his gun. Dorothy dodged the bullets, but one still grazed her arm, and the girl reached for her shotgun, which was hanging on her back. They froze in one position. Stan pointed his pistols at the girl's body, and Dorothy pointed her shotgun at his head. Neither the guy nor the girl would have time to evade, and they both understood this. Dorothy said that no matter who the guy was, he couldn't survive a shot from that distance. The girl had nothing to lose, so she pulled the trigger and shot at the enemy. But suddenly she heard the clang of metal, as if bullets were hitting a metal wall. But the figure of the guy in front of her did not waver. The girl was shocked. She was sure that she had defeated the enemy. The smoke from the shot cleared, and she saw bullet holes on the hero that hit the plate armor. The plates, like many small beetles, ran all over the hero's clothes and removed holes, as if the clothes had the properties of regeneration. Stan pointed the gun at the stunned girl, who had nowhere to run. Most warriors blindly believe that defeating a sniper in close combat is as easy as shelling pears. The shot struck Dorothy's head, her blood pouring like rose petals onto the cruel desert sand. The system notified that the hero killed Dorothy and received 7,500 experience points for this. Yes, an ordinary sniper would be weaker in close combat. It's just a pity that Stan is not an ordinary sniper.